That afternoon, the sky was gloomy. Ominous cuz echoed as Gabimaru awaited his execution. Yet, the executioner's blade struck him dozens of times, leaving him completely unharmed. The executioner's sword even shattered, astonishing everyone present. Gabimaru couldn't understand why he couldn't die, as there was nothing left for him to cling to in life. Gabimaru was a ninja born in a Wagakure, trained in assassination techniques since childhood. Many lost their lives during training, but in return, those who survived gained superhuman bodies. That's why the executioner couldn't kill Gabimaru earlier, and he hadn't even used his ninjutsu yet. The next day, Gabimaru was dragged out to be burned alive, an excruciating form of execution where victims are sometimes mercifully killed beforehand. But even the stakes shattered against Gabimaru. The flames were lit. Despite the pyre blazing around him, he remained perfectly fine, only his clothes burned to ash. He asked the girl outside the prison cell to get him some clothes, but she was diligently taking notes on his profile, completely unfazed by his nudity. Gabimaru had no information about his parents, only rumors that the village chief killed them when he was young. Since then, Gabimaru was raised as a ninja, living without dreams, only killing on his superior's orders. As for why he was captured, Gabimaru had tried to leave the village. The chief forbade anyone from leaving, so his comrades betrayed him, leading to his capture during a mission. The next day, Gabimaru was brought out to be drawn and quartered by oxen. A human leg can withstand about 50 kilograms of force, but an ox can pull over 950 kilograms. This method wouldn't just tear off his limbs, it would rip the convict's body from groin to chest. As soon as the straw on their backs was lit, the oxen would go wild and run for their lives. But Gabimaru only tensed his legs slightly, and they couldn't even budge. Eventually, both oxen collapsed, exhausted and foaming at the mouth. Only then did the girl approach Gabimaru and ask, "You say you want to die, but when faced with death, you resist it. What's the real reason you tried to leave the village?" Gabimaru blandly uttered 3 words. "There's nothing." He was the best in a Wagakure, recognized by the village chief and allowed to marry his daughter. Despite her cruel and ruthless father, she was carefree. Her innocence completely changed Gabimaru's chaotic life. Things like not wearing sandals indoors, praying once a day, and showing gratitude for life itself. Gabimaru was confused and exhausted by her. He didn't want to lose himself, so he asked the chief to let him leave. And the chief agreed, on the condition that he complete one final mission. He actually knew he was being set up, but even if he escaped, the villagers would pursue him. He shouldn't have defied the chief in the first place. That night, someone warned the girl not to get involved with Gabimaru the Hollow, a monster who had killed 20 people before his capture. Meanwhile, Gabimaru was also questioning himself why he couldn't accept death. Perhaps tomorrow, everything will finally end. This time, he was thrown into a cauldron of oil, boiling at over 370 degrees. However, once again, he resisted death. After numerous failures, the authorities resorted to their most trusted method. Sajiri, the girl who had been recording his information for days. She wasn't just a sword tester sent from Edo, but an executioner from the renowned Yamada clan. Members of this clan had been sword testers and executioners for generations, making their skill undeniable. For the first time in his life, Gabimaru felt the sensation of his head leaving his neck. Through this, he knew the woman before him was no ordinary opponent. His hands instantly shattered his restraints before he even realized it. In a flash, Sajiri appeared behind Gabimaru. Luckily, his evasive instincts reacted in time, but the blade still lightly grazed his neck. Sajiri continued her assault, and Gabimaru leaped to evade. He was stunned to realize that he didn't want to die. Due to the nature of her job, Sajiri had witnessed countless people's final moments. From them, she learned to discern a person's true emotions before death. After hearing Gabimaru's story, she concluded that he still had a lingering attachment to his wife. Her words struck a nerve deep within Gabimaru. He hastily grabbed his sword and charged at Sajiri. She parried his attacks, telling him he couldn't die by execution because of his feelings for his wife. Gabimaru angrily yelled that he was a hollow man with no emotions. Only his wife was the one person who said he wasn't like that. She called him kind, because he didn't scorn or fear the burn scar on her face. In a Wagakure, men were warriors and women were breeding machines. No one was allowed to live as a human being. It was her own father who caused the burn scar on her face, to prevent her from living like a normal woman. But even that couldn't extinguish the hope in her heart. Seeing her husband still self-conscious and looking down, she gave him an unexpected kiss. It made him blush and fluster, unsure what to do. How could a hollow man react so endearingly? Yet, as Gabimaru exchanged blows with Sajiri, he gnashed his teeth and yelled that he was a hollow man, a brutal monster who could never be human, no matter how hard he tried. He still remembered his wife's horrified expression when he returned after every slaughter, or whenever she secretly prayed for his safety. That's why Gabimaru wanted to retire from fighting and live a quiet life with his wife. He thought the chief would understand, as it was his own daughter. But no, the chief prioritized the village's interest above all else, even sacrificing his daughter's happiness. In that moment, Gabimaru knew that a monster could never find peace. Just then, Sajiri produced a special pardon. It wouldn't just absolve Gabimaru of all his crimes. He would also receive the shogun's protection. Neither courts nor ninjas would dare touch him. In return, he would have to go to hell. Of course, this wasn't the hell of the afterlife. It was quite the opposite. It was a fertile land brimming with joy where no pain existed. Shinsenkyo. Since ancient times, people had called it beautiful names like paradise or heaven. Shinsenkyo lay far to the southwest, Those who found it were overwhelmed by the sight of 100 flowers blooming and butterflies filling the sky, just like in legends. It was rumored that an immortal elixir existed there, so the shogun sent an expedition. However, only a boat returned, filled with flowers and dismembered body parts. The shogun sent 5 more expeditions, but when they returned, their bodies had become a source of life for the flowers. Gabimaru heard this and thought Sajiri was telling a fairy tale. Everyone thought so, until they saw it for themselves. The shogun was even more convinced the elixir was there. The immortal elixir was there, so he decided to go all in. The next expedition would be chosen from the most dangerous death row inmates across the country. Whoever brought back the immortal elixir would be pardoned. This meant Sajiri was here to find someone with both skill and a desire to live. On her way here, she heard that Gabimaru's wife was still in Iwagakure village. Ever since he was captured, she had secluded herself and spoken to no one. She must still be waiting for him to return. The only way for Gabimaru to reunite with his wife now was to go to the mysterious island with other dangerous criminals and earn that pardon. Before Gabimaru could even reply, the magistrate loudly protested. He even threatened to kill Sajiri if she dared to interfere. However, his tears fell. Gabimaru suddenly unleashed his fire-release ninjutsu, turning himself into a blazing torch, killing all the guards inside the prison, while Sajiri restrained the magistrate. Gabimaru then agreed to search for the immortal elixir. But knowing he had to make a detour to Edo first, he found it extremely troublesome. No sooner had he decided than he got cheeky. Sajiri warned him she'd call off the deal if he didn't want to go. So he quickly said he would obediently cooperate. Now, whatever it took, Gabimaru would do it, all just to survive and return to his beloved wife. Back to Sagiri's childhood. Her father once had a condemned storyteller request to be beheaded mid-story. Of course, he accepted the request. His cut was so fast the convict didn't even realize his head had left his neck. A perfect strike. No pain, no lingering emotions. Sagiri's goal was to achieve that very strike. As she grew up, her strikes were considered excellent for a woman. However, her blade still contained doubt and fear. The convicts died painful deaths. This was pointed out by another of Sagiri's colleagues. She promised to improve next time, but it didn't get much better. The truth was clearly reflected in her blade. Sagiri's sword became increasingly weighed down by the fear of causing convicts to suffer. She didn't know what to do to eliminate the doubt and fear in her heart, and reach the peak like her father. Back to the present. 30 of the country's most notorious death row inmates were brought before the 11th shogun, Najiyoshi. Sajiri checked the profiles of some of them: murder, arson, you name it. There was even a former police officer. At first, they loudly cursed the shogun, but when they heard the announcement about going to Shinsenkyo to retrieve the immortal elixir, and that whatever their crimes they would be granted a pardon, the atmosphere immediately shifted. The death row inmate who only killed women and children trembled with joy, knowing with his pardon, he could freely act without fear of capture. Seeing this, Sajiri wondered if she could kill this demon without hesitation. While the others were overjoyed by the announcement, Gabimaru yawned, clearly bored. His prominent white hair and small stature made the purple-haired woman behind him recognize him as Gabimaru the Hollow. She even expressed disappointment that he looked shabbier and more ragged than the rumors suggested. Sajiri, standing nearby, was still thinking about beheading Gabimaru. He seemed almost harmless now, completely unlike the terrifying rumors about him. Perhaps that's why when Sajiri imagined Gabimaru's death, she feared it so much that she broke out in a cold sweat. Now, a shogun's subordinate was about to explain Shinsenkyo, but the criminals didn't care about that. So they were unmasked and witnessed firsthand the only person to return from the recent expedition. Upon his return, his body was covered in bumps which slowly blossomed the next day, finally transforming him into something neither human nor plant. About 60 more members were still missing. The shogun's side had no clue what happened on the island, except for this living corpse. The convicts heard this and immediately backed out. A dark-skinned kid suddenly spoke up asking, "What if there's no immortal elixir on the island?" Making the others panic and echo his sentiment. The journey to the island was voluntary. Anyone who didn't want to go could leave. No sooner had the words left his mouth than a tall, dark Yakuza boss immediately stood up to leave with his subordinates. But he hadn't taken more than a few steps before a Yamada clan member swiftly beheaded him. Now they had no other choice. Each prisoner on the island would be supervised by a Yamada executioner. A single struggle, and their head would be off their neck. In case the supervisor died, whether they attacked or were killed, the prisoner would also be executed. And if they didn't stay with their supervisor, they wouldn't be allowed back on the ship. The shogun then suddenly added another requirement: the number of boats and Yamada clan executioners was limited, so the number of prisoners needed to be reduced before reaching the island. The blonde heard this and immediately choked a man with a split lip to death, thinking, "So, you just want us to slaughter each other, huh?" And so, the death match began. A bloody massacre officially unfolded. The prisoners butchered each other like wild beasts, their hands still bound. They used every method of killing, from strangling to throwing rocks at each other's faces. Every one of them fought desperately to earn a spot on the island. Old man Najiyoshi watched with wide, delighted eyes, because battles like this were rarely seen these days. Meanwhile, his subordinate standing nearby thought the old man was foolish. There was nothing interesting about watching prisoners eliminate each other. Najiyoshi was particularly interested in those with the red mark, because they possessed powerful special abilities. For example, the blonde who just slammed an elbow into another's face was from a bandit gang deep in the Izo Mountains. The purple-haired woman had participated in last year's invasion of Shikiwa Castle. defeating all the retainers within. The man wielding 3 swords was the swordsman known as Dragon Blade, Tommy Aganitsu, the unrivaled master. And the huge, muscular man sprawled on the ground over there. Rumor had it no weapon could pierce his skin. But most notable of all was Gabimaru the Hollow. Yet the living legend of assassins stood still amidst the brutal struggle. Aizen advised Sajiri to get used to the sight, because when they set foot on the island, it would be even more brutal and savage. Would she be able to bring herself to kill then? Aizen took this opportunity to remind Sajiri that she was not suited for an executioner's profession. The daughter of a warrior should live a quiet life at home, and stay away from the cruel fate of an executioner. If Sajiri could have, she would have already done so, from a young age. She had lived surrounded by the pungent smell of blood, and no matter how much she rejected it, the Yamada clan still made money from the deaths of others. As a member of the Yamada clan, Sajiri was bullied and chased by her peers. She only knew to go home and sob uncontrollably. She had intended to close her eyes and ignore it, until she saw the truth reflected in her sword. She was an executioner's daughter. She couldn't live a normal life like other girls. Now, some prisoners tried to ambush the executioners to escape. They targeted Sajiri because she was a woman. Aizen tried to intervene, but she stopped him. Even if she couldn't escape this fate, she wouldn't passively accept it. She would forge her own path. Though fear made her pause for a beat, Sajiri still charged, slicing off 3 heads effortlessly, only for self-doubt to continue tormenting her mind afterward. Suddenly, Gabimaru's voice pulled her back to the present. Killing was never okay. Why choose the most brutal way when there are plenty of others? True, they were all murderers, but not everyone was interested in killing. Sajiri only killed those who needed to be killed. She had no time for this bloody game. However, his words only infuriated the samurai, and they ordered the others to kill him to earn a pardon. So, one of them immediately picked up a rock and threw it straight at Gabimaru. But he easily dodged it in an instant. Seeing his opponents were determined to kill him, he had no choice but to kill them despite not wanting to. Gabimaru slowly stepped towards him, then, quick as lightning, tore out his throat, sending blood splattering everywhere. He effortlessly dispatched each of them using the most brutal methods, even biting straight into their necks like wild wolves. Gabimaru ran straight to the sea, performing a mass slaughter under the blood-red sunset. His hands, covered in fresh blood, dripped onto the sea, making everyone realize with horror what the legendary #1 assassin truly was. After witnessing everything, Sajiri realized something. What she needed wasn't the strength to overcome the fear of killing, but the resolve to bear the weight of the lives taken by her blade. Suddenly grasping this truth brought Sajiri to tears. Aizen, standing next to her, thought she was scared by the previous scene. He asserted this responsibility was too great for her, but she seriously said she would kill Gabimaru. Finally, after the insane slaughter, the surviving death row inmates were the bandit Lord Azur Chobe, the Dragon Blade Tommy Aganitsu, Nuduge of Sanka village, Kamak Kai, the murderous monk Hodobo, Gabimaru the Hollow, the prostitute Akajinu, female ninja Yuzuiha, the apostate Mozo Makiza, and the giant Yokozuda. 10 death row inmates, under the supervision of 10 Yamada clan executioners, would set sail for the Hell Island, also known as the Paradise of Ultimate Bliss, to search for the immortal elixir. In Iwagakure village, there was an unspoken rule. Even if the chief was stabbed, drawn and quartered, or shot by arrows, or had his guts spilling out onto the ground, he couldn't die. Perhaps the medicine the chief accidentally acquired from a foreign merchant had made him immortal. Gabimaru told Sajiri this story, but looking at her expression, he knew she didn't believe such a medicine truly existed. Gabimaru asserted that the immortal elixir was real. He just didn't know if it was on this Asterisk Island. For easier searching, the executioners and prisoners split up and headed in different directions. The place was filled with fragrant flowers and exotic plants. Chirping birds echoed everywhere, making Sajiri couldn't help but exclaim. Anyone who witnessed this beautiful sight firsthand wouldn't be surprised if the immortal elixir existed here. Gabimaru immediately disagreed. Terrifying is more like it, he said. Everything around here looks unnatural, artificial, and no one knew what would happen next. He urged Sajiri to stay alert, instead of getting distracted by looking around. With that, he untied his own hand restraints. But Sajiri didn't allow Gabimaru to do that. He retorted, "How can I search for anything with my hands tied?" Sajiri insisted on following the shogun's orders, threatening to behead him immediately if he dared to break the rules again. Gabimaru tried to convince her to bend the rules a little for him, while also pointing out the absurdity of being given provisions only enough for 3 days. The only clue confined to a tiny piece of paper. Clearly, the shogun hadn't cared if they found the immortal elixir from the start. Without a word, Sajiri swung her sword towards Gabimaru, reminding him that she was an executioner, not his ally. If he failed to find it and wasn't pardoned, that would be none of her business. And if he wasn't wearing his restraints, Sajiri wouldn't hesitate to take his head right then and there. Gabimaru sighed and extended his hands to be restrained, to reunite with his wife soon. He had no choice but to listen to her. Just then, a fist aimed straight for his face. The attacker was Kamak Kai, one of the death row inmates sent to this island. He was a warrior monk extremely obsessed with armor and weapons. Many said he had killed and stolen hundreds of weapons from various warriors. Gabimaru's neck was dislocated, but he still managed to point out that Khan wasn't tied. Sajiri immediately asked Kiso where his restraints were, only for him to criticize her for being too rigid. Being so stubborn, she'd always be small fry. Khan then interrupted their conversation. He furiously chastised Gabimaru for daring to ignore him. then pulled out his collection of tools to dismember him to his heart's content. Weapons were only beautiful when bathed in fresh blood. Khan would show Gabimaru what that beauty was like. He didn't understand what this pervert was thinking. Wasting time here would let others get ahead. Khan actually had it all figured out, since there were no clues from the start. He could just kill everyone first, then search at his leisure. The Yamada executioners were only here to supervise, so they could freely slaughter each other. Gabimaru was forced to fight, and that girl making him wear restraints was just an added nuisance. Khan charged fiercely, swinging down a powerful strike at his head, which shattered his weapon to pieces. Khan repeatedly switched to other weapons, but they didn't fare much better. Gabimaru was still casually tying his restraints with his mouth. Khan was furious, his eyes bulging. He would use everything he had to beat him, but he had no time to play with him. With one knee kick to a vital point, Khan's massive body was instantly sent flying, leaving both Kiso and Sajiri wide-eyed in astonishment. A barrage of Khan's weapons rained down on Gabimaru. But not only did he dodge them, he kicked the spear from earlier straight back into Khan. He thought it was a one-hit kill, but Khan had cautiously worn a full suit of armor and was still perfectly fine. He cackled, warning Gabimaru he was as good as dead, only to be killed by his own stolen weapons. Gabimaru hadn't even broken a sweat. His hands were still tied. Kiso then suddenly drew his sword. They thought he was going to ambush Gabimaru. It turned out he took Khan's head to return home. Sajiri reminded him to be careful on his way back, as 60 other criminals were still roaming the island. Kiso didn't expect her to still worry about him, while he just felt lucky to escape this chaos early. Even before the ships docked, the death row inmates had tried to eliminate each other. Once on the island, some conspired to cooperate for personal gain. None of them adhered to social norms. They didn't care about rules or obligations. Some even demanded to kill the executioners to survive. For the samurai, the shogun's orders were absolute, but now that didn't matter. Their top priority was finding the immortal elixir. After talking for a while, Kiso even offered to help Sajiri take Gabimaru's head. But before Kiso could even draw his sword, Gabimaru stopped him. Right now, he only wanted to return to his wife and didn't care about anything else. Kiso chuckled, telling Gabimaru he should hurry. According to his prediction, the situation would completely change in a few hours. Aizen had just arrived on the island, having escorted the giant Yokozuna. Noticing something amiss, he drew his sword and charged, but quickly became food for the murderer. Half of the remaining criminals also died upon reaching the island. The bandit Azachobe killed the Buddha corpse Hosubo. The courtesan Akajinu was cut down by the executioner accompanying her. The apostate Mozo Makiza died from a rusty blade. Kiso believes if this expedition fails, there will always be another, because the shogunate has secretly allied with Iwagakure village. Not even the executioners are safe. Kiso heard that the next head of the Yamada clan will be decided after this, so ambitious individuals might not spare Sajiri. She reflected and realized Kiso was right. Many days have passed since she first met Gabimaru, yet she still doesn't understand his true nature. While lost in thought, Gabimaru suddenly lunged to attack her, proving that no one can be trusted, especially not merciless killers. In the past, his parents wanted to leave the village right after he was born. A skilled ninja, they were mercilessly killed by the village chief. This was also a harsh lesson he taught Gabimaru. Emotions make a ninja weak. If you're not strong enough, you can't protect yourself, let alone those you cherish. Currently, Gabimaru and Sajiri are engaged in an incredibly fierce battle. The clang of blades echoed sharply. By any means, he must find the elixir of life before the village forces arrive. Therefore, he must kill Sajiri, as she is obstructing him. Meanwhile, Sajiri knows she has to finish Gabimaru, but for some reason, she's still hesitating. Gabimaru has a similar question. He should have killed Sajiri by now, instead of just parrying her attacks. His wife once said that men he no longer wanted to kill. She also advised him to accept and listen to his own feelings. A strong-willed person is someone who is honest with their emotions. Thanks to her, Gabimaru began to express emotions, but at the same time, he also learned hatred, which caused his feelings to interfere with subsequent missions. Even now, Gabimaru has many chances to finish Sajiri, but he can't bring himself to do it. At this rate, he'll only survive on the island by luck, let alone receive a pardon. Remembering the village chief's words about not being able to protect anything, if he wasn't strong enough, Gabimaru decided to break Sagiri's sword, but she stubbornly used her scabbard to defend herself. However, at the last moment, she was still subdued under Gabimaru's blade. The emotionless demon within him resurfaced. What's one more death? Yet at the decisive moment, Gabimaru couldn't strike the blow. Now Sajiri suddenly remembered something. Every time he killed, it was as if he was enduring something horrible. It seems Gabimaru is also wrestling with his inner emotions, just like her. Gabimaru was so frustrated he was almost in tears at his own weakness. If he stays this soft, how can he ever reunite with his wife? Sajiri gently said that it wasn't weakness, but the seed of strength. Daring to confront one's own emotions is true strength. If Gabimaru repents, faces himself, and finds the right path, Sajiri is willing to follow him to the end. She wants him to prove that a sinner like him can overcome his nature and start anew. Sajiri also has to learn to face her own emotions to become stronger. Through the battle they just fought, both understood each other better and began to trust one another. In another development, the swordsman Tamiya was stung on the hand by a human-faced butterfly. He immediately cut off the stung hand to prevent the poison from spreading throughout his body. The executioner Fuchi was stunned, but when he saw the severed hand turn black and sprout flowers, he immediately understood the problem. Soon after, a barrage of bizarre creatures swarmed in. The ground shook violently with the appearance of a long-tongued demon. Gabimaru on the other side is also facing an extremely strange creature. To ease the tension, let's take a look at the past of the swordsman Tamiya. After days of fighting without finding a worthy opponent, he agreed to serve under Tatsumi, a boastful man, always bragging about his large mansion. It was for money and the dragon character in his name that Tamiya reluctantly accepted. However, during one drunken night, Tatsumi laughed, saying Tamiya was known as Dragon Sword, but couldn't kill a real dragon. This enraged him, leading him to chop up the dragon on the gate and the coward's liver, causing him to be exiled from the clan and sentenced to death. Tamiya wants a pardon to be free. Then he'll continue to hone his sword skills and split that mansion in half. Fuchi couldn't understand his twisted way of thinking, while Tamiya also didn't understand why Fuchi carried those dissection knives. Fuchi explained that the Yamada clan doesn't just consist of executioners, but also includes sword testing and medicine. His specialty is autopsies, deciphering the human body's structure to advance medical science. With that, Fuchi suddenly drew his sword as a warning, bringing sudden death before Tamiya's eyes, so he asked no more questions and turned to leave. Tamiya's plan is to eliminate other rivals, and then find the elixir of life. Fuchi pretty much agreed with that idea. And as for Gabimaru, his opponent is a grotesque fish-headed, human-bodied creature. It suddenly snapped off a tendril from its hand, then unleashed a gum-gum attack towards Gabimaru. But he not only dodged it, but also shattered it. However, he was immediately grabbed by the monster's leg and slammed to the ground. Luckily, he still managed to escape. This thing is unlike anything Gabimaru has ever encountered. By ninja law, he shouldn't confront it. He's torn between fleeing alone or fleeing with Sajiri. Then the monster's sharp tail wrapped around him and flung him away. Just one opponent has already injured Gabimaru so severely. Yet massive monsters are flocking from all directions. Facing their disgusting smiles, Sajiri felt a little afraid. While Gabimaru had already entered battle mode, he dashed forward like lightning, using fire ninjutsu to incinerate the long-haired monster. Next, he beheaded a demonic creature. In Gabimaru's mind, only 3 words remained: kill to live. Sajiri, standing below, could only stare in shock. Everything she was witnessing was completely different from the real world. Then, in a moment of carelessness, Sajiri was approached by a monster from behind, and giant centipedes blocked her escape route. Gabimaru originally intended to let it eliminate her for him, but then he instantly appeared, slicing off the monster's arm to rescue her. Only after it was all over did he realize what he had just done. The green monster was about to sneak attack when another executioner cut it in half. Now Yuzuriha appeared. She's also a ninja, just like Gabimaru, and wants to be his close friend. Remembering his wife's words that when someone helps you, you should say thank you, Gabimaru first bowed his head to thank them, then asked Yuzuriha what she wanted from him. Everyone is fighting tooth and nail. There's no reason for her to help him. Yuzuriha wiggled in front of Gabimaru, complimenting him on his strength and reliability, saying she wanted him to protect her from danger. Yuzuriha's cheap seductive tactics didn't faze Gabimaru. He gently slammed her to the ground, teaching her a lesson for trying to flirt with a married man. Although Yuzuriha was caught off guard and a bit embarrassed, she genuinely wanted to cooperate with him. After all, 5 people are better than 2. Before discussing that, Sajiri wondered why Yuzuriha was escorted by 2 executioners. Actually, Genji was in charge of the apostate Mozama Akiza, but he was already tricked and killed by Yuzuriha. Genji thought one person wasn't enough to control her, so he followed. Gabimaru and Sajiri understood immediately after hearing this. This guy is clearly under Yuzuriha's spell, not adhering to any ninja code. The one originally responsible for escorting her was the young man named Senta. Yuzuriha quickly cut him off, continuing to persuade both sides to cooperate. As soon as Sajiri agreed, the female ninja immediately hugged Gabimaru, resulting in him throwing her to the ground for a second time. However, this time Yuzuriha didn't just lie there and take it. She quickly wrapped her legs around Gabimaru's neck, pulling his face close to hers, and whispered, "Even if we find the elixir of life, only one person will be pardoned. So let's just use each other until the very end." After her seductive words, Yuzuriha finally released Gabimaru, not forgetting to put on a sweet, manipulative act, begging and pleading, making him sick to his stomach. Yuzuriha stopped playing around and seriously offered a deal. Gabimaru lends her his strength, and in return, she'll provide him with information. Those strange creatures earlier were nothing compared to the insects here. Human-faced butterflies can poison and cause hallucinations in victims who come into close contact with them. Yuzuriha learned this through Makiza. After befriending him, she used sweet words to lure him into being a guinea pig. The centipedes look creepy, but they only eat dead bodies, so there's no need to worry about them. Other types of insects won't attack if you don't get close. All this knowledge is thanks to Makiza's efforts. Finally, Yuzuriha only needed to feign death to make him drop his guard, and killed him. Senna continued to add some useful information. Many items on the monsters' bodies had strong religious characteristics. Most were a mixture of Buddhism and Taoism. The more they learned, the more this island seemed nothing like paradise. Sajiri also discovered that the internal structure and the muscle groups severed by swords in these monsters belonged to the same species. Now Yuzuriha enthusiastically said that cooperating to gather information was the right thing to do, making Gabimaru wonder why she was trying so hard. It turns out Yuzuriha has a sick younger sister. Unable to afford medicine, she became a ninja. Then she complained about the hardships of becoming a ninja. But Gabamaru knew she was lying from the first sentence. In reality, Yuzuriha has no reason at all. She simply doesn't want to die young. Gabamaru still had one more question. What did she do to that Makiza guy during the competition? Yuzuriha squinted slyly, saying she did nothing, and subtly warned him not to meddle in others' affairs if he didn't want to die early. Gabamaru then agreed to cooperate, which made her so happy she hugged him, only to be kicked away by him a third time. Sajiri watched them chat lively. She wondered what she had accomplished since setting foot on the island. Just as she was in deep thought, she suddenly fainted. In another development, this young man, Toma, was accepted into the Yamada clan after only 1 month of training. The challenge he had to overcome before being promoted was beheading a prisoner. Toma volunteered a location to rescue his brother. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. He was tortured for a whole month, waiting for his brother to rescue him. Who knew the only way out was to come to this cursed island? Fortunately, Chobe wasn't afraid of the strange creatures and was even excited to cut them down in an instant. From childhood, Toma admired his brother's ability to assess situations. After their lord, whom they served, committed a crime and was forced to disband the clan, their mother died of illness, and their father was executed not long after for participating in a revenge plot. The two brothers were left begging on the streets and were attacked by bandits. Yet, Chobe managed to turn the situation around, turning enemies into allies. As he grew up, Chobe became a highly sought-after bandit, but he still tried to protect his younger brother, believing that Toma would surely come back to rescue him. From childhood to adulthood, he was protected by his brother every step of the way. Toma concluded that the most adaptable person is the strongest. Chobe is a master of adaptation. If he hasn't grasped the situation, he'll run, then regain control. Just like now, the two of them are running for their lives. However, Toma was grabbed by a slimy green monster, yet Chobe kept running. What makes him invincible is abandoning what cannot be changed. But the weak little brother from back then is no more. Toma can now cut off the monster's arm himself, even holding them off so his brother can escape. Suddenly, Chobe turned back and sliced the monster in half. It turns out he was just looting the monster's weapons. The two brothers were talking when Chobe was stabbed by a monster, bleeding from the mouth. What's worse, they could talk and surrounded the two of them. As Toma was in a fearful panic, Chobe suddenly remembered the day he was sentenced to death, then bared his teeth and laughed loudly. He leaped high, splitting the rosary-wearing monster in half, then cut the one standing next to it in two, and continued to effortlessly cut down monsters as if slicing bananas, with fresh blood gushing like a river. Toma was incredibly proud of his outstanding brother. Remembering years ago when he joined the bandit gang, he cried and whined, wanting to go home. To go from a samurai's son to a bandit, isn't that too much of a joke? At that time, Chobe advised his brother to just trust him and not worry about anything else. After slaughtering all the monsters, Chobe decided to kill anyone who got in their way, then find and drink the elixir of life with his brother. In a hazy dream, young Sajiri didn't understand why her father always looked at her with disappointment. Luckily, she woke up from the nightmare. She was confused, not knowing where she was or who she was. Genji explained that she was poisoned by the butterflies and fainted, so the group took the opportunity to rest in a cave, far away from the monsters and insects. Even though she wasn't fully recovered, Sajiri still wanted to go supervise the prisoners. Who knew she'd step outside to see Gabamaru busy cooking dinner, Senna mending clothes, and Yuzuriha taking over supervision, while gathering ingredients for cooking. Gabamaru surveyed the island but found nothing resembling the elixir of life. When Yuzuriha asked him what he knew about this fruit, he downplayed his suspicion about the immortal village chief and said it was the first time he'd heard the name, so he was only searching based on the drawing. Gabamaru also discovered some flowers, similar to those growing on the samurai corpses brought back to the mainland. From that, he deduced that all 60 people from the previous expedition shared the same fate, so most of the flora on the island were once human. Upon hearing this, Yuzuriha immediately threw the food at Gabamaru's face, accusing him of daring to cook human flesh for the group. Gabamaru explained he didn't use those plants. Senna now spoke up, advising everyone not to focus too much on the drawing of the fruit, but to also pay attention to the words next to it. The stone statues around the island have features similar to Buddhism and Taoism. The question is, who created them, and are they still alive here? Sajiri didn't think there was anyone else on this island besides them. Both the monsters and insects here were too dangerous for humans. Their ecology and behavior are also very mysterious. They have bones and flesh, but no internal organs or reproductive organs. Their appearance is even more bizarre. Animal heads sprout from mutated human bodies. The objects monsters wear are also low-quality religious items. They are terrifying but also very stupid. Senna believes they have all been thrown into a sick and mysterious vortex, making all earthly logic turn to zero here. Yet Gabamaru chuckled with delight. Creatures that can live without internal organs are a clue to immortality. The elixir of life is on this island. As long as it exists, finding it is only a matter of time. Yuzuriha also joined in with a joke, saying maybe the group was already dead and this island was the afterlife. Senna immediately dismissed that morbid idea and agreed with Gabamaru's perspective. For now, they should start extracting clues by investigating the monsters, seeing where and how they live. As sunset cast golden hues across the forest, Genji advised Sajiri to take a boat back to the mainland. He'd handle the rest. After all, his prisoner was already dead. Women of the Yamada clan are obligated to marry into the next family, so the shogun won't punish her for this. Sajiri disagreed, as her mission wasn't complete. Genji praised her spirit, but also said it wasn't realistic. Sajiri isn't strong enough to kill Gabimaru right now. Her sword was also looted from the corpse of a disgraced eagle. A sword is the heart of a warrior. Losing a sword on the battlefield is common. Genji acknowledged Sagiri's extraordinary swordsmanship, but as a sword tester and executioner, this island requires practical combat skills, something Sajiri lacks, and that goes beyond a woman's limits. Just then, Senna walked up and asked a critical question. Would returning be easy? When most samurai who came to the island never returned. The proof is right here. The people are struggling through the dense fog to leave. Tenza, filled with determination, climbed into the boat, but the young boy Nozogai scolded him for being childish. He suggested Tenza observe the water's currents, instead of trying to use brute force and exhausting himself. Tenza felt like his eyes had been opened. This was the wisdom of the Sanka clan. He promised to bring Nozogai back safely and begged the shogun to spare his life, because among all the prisoners he was the most deserving of life. Just then, they spotted a large ship. Thinking it was a shogunate vessel, they found only shipwrecks scattered across the sea. The surrounding scene was chilling, and strange creatures were appearing and disappearing through the fog. Tenza drew his sword, ready to fight. Nozogai told him not to, but it was too late, because at that moment, several tentacles struck their boat. After jumping onto something, he explained that the animals here are very sensitive to bright objects and murderous intent. Unfortunately, the tentacles have now surrounded both of them. Tenza had no choice but to run and slash as he searched for a usable boat. In a life-or-death situation, Nozogai suddenly remembered his grandfather's words. He had to live to continue the Sanka clan's bloodline. It all started when Nozogai accidentally saw some samurai wandering in the mountains. Thinking they were lost, he kindly offered to lead them down the mountain, right? One of them suggested resting at his village, and he unknowingly brought disaster upon his own home, leading to the brutal massacre of the entire village that very day. What's more, Nozogai was captured and awaited execution after they extracted all information about the Sanka clan. In his most desperate moment, Tenza appeared, determined to rescue the unfortunate Nozogai by bringing him to this island with him. At this moment, the two ran for a distance and then encountered Kiso's flower-covered corpse. Tenza wanted to save his comrade, but a tentacle suddenly sliced him in half. Currently, dozens of tentacles have swarmed and surrounded the area. Nozogai looked at Kiso's corpse and remembered his grandfather. He lost all spirit and collapsed to the ground. Guilt and shame overwhelmed Nozogai, making him no longer want to flee or fight. He believed this was the punishment he deserved, because he had caused the death of his grandfather and everyone in the village. The Sanka tradition is to live for the mountain, for the village. Now, only Nozogai survived while everyone else died, so he saw no point in living. Tenza cared nothing for those traditions, constantly slashing at the tentacles to protect Nozogai. No matter what, he would bring him back. Thanks to his brother's insightful words, Nozogai understood the situation, so Tenza threw him a sword with the goal of getting past the monsters and reaching the boat ahead. So, after a frantic struggle to exhaustion, they safely reached shore. However, all the currents here lead towards the island, until they find a current heading out. Only then is there hope of escaping. While washing the blood off his body, Tenza discovered a shocking truth. Nozogai wasn't a boy, but a real girl. He shyly covered his eyes, not daring to look. Yet she comfortably showed herself to him without any embarrassment. This guy is quite a good boy. Nozogai decided that upon returning, she would have to marry him. After cleaning up, the two decided to go around the island to find an outward current. Back with Sagiri's group, Genji still insisted she return when dawn broke. Senna half agreed with him, half wanted Sajiri to stay in case Gabimaru rebelled. That night, Sajiri came to supervise Gabimaru, replacing another executioner. He suddenly asked if she was feeling better, which completely surprised her. It turns out Gabimaru intentionally made everyone stop at the cave to wait for her injuries to heal. Thanks to Sajiri, he's calmer and more determined. Even if a Wagakura village arrives, they just need to plan a counterattack. Gabimaru wants to live with his wife, so he won't run from obstacles anymore, but will confront them directly. He also encouraged Sajiri not to doubt herself. She's truly strong. She just hasn't realized it yet. That's why the next morning, Sajiri flatly refused Genji's request to return. She had lived under the judging eyes of everyone because she was a daughter of the Yamada clan. All she wanted was to be recognized as a true samurai. She knew she was weak and inexperienced, but at least she wanted to choose her own way of life. Men and women alike can prove their worth when they are given a chance and seize it. Genji's face darkened when he heard this, drawing his sword and yelling. This island is a battlefield, not a place for women and children. But in a flash, Sajiri disarmed him. Just as the teachings said, you can find weapons on the battlefield. Genji angrily reclaimed his sword, then was suddenly hit by Yokozuda, who ripped off a chunk of his stomach. Yokozuda was born into a family with loving parents. From a young age, he ate more than other children. Perhaps that's why tremendous power was latent within him since childhood. Just throwing a few stones was enough to kill his parents. The villagers were also turned into donuts and died by him. Currently, Genji, while protecting Sajiri, took a full claw swipe from Yokozuda. He was sent flying far away, crashing into a tree with a thump and coughing up blood. Sajiri rushed over in horror to check on him. Genji, with his last breath, told her to run before it was too late. However, at this moment, Yokozuda lunged towards Sajiri. Fortunately, Gabimaru appeared in time, kicking him away. The oversized body tumbled across the ground, breaking quite a few trees. But he was unharmed and still managed to get back up. Sajiri worriedly said that was the giant of Byzantine. He was assigned to accompany Aizen, but now he's wandering alone here. Gabimaru stared intently into Yokozuda's bloodthirsty eyes. Knowing that avoiding this fight would be difficult, his only option was to kill his opponent. However, his kick just now was ineffective, proving that Yokozuda's body was as tough as a ninja from a Wagakure village. According to the 9th iron rule of a ninja, the village chief taught Gabimaru to always analyze his opponent before attacking, so he needed to test how strong this guy was before deciding on an appropriate attack strategy. But Yokozuda has a short temper. He ripped out a large tree with one hand, then threw it straight at Gabimaru. Sajiri gritted her teeth, using her body to shield Genji. Gabimaru didn't forget to tell her to stay put and not dare to run to him for support. Yokozuda's physique completely outmatched Gabimaru, so he had to call Yuzuriha, who was perched on a nearby tree branch, down to help. But she shrugged, saying she was only responsible for gathering information, and fighting was entirely up to Gabimaru. Now, her cheering him on was already a big help. Gabimaru was so annoyed that his eyes twitched, but he had to quickly push it aside as Yokozuda was upon him. This swipe didn't look too dangerous. He planned to put all his strength into a punch aimed at the giant's right hand. However, just as that massive hand was about to strike his face, his ninja instincts told him if he didn't dodge, he'd be dead for sure. Indeed, with just one hand slam, Yokozuda churned up the earth and rocks beneath Gabimaru's feet. Seeing the mosquito narrowly escape, Yokozuda flailed his limbs wildly to catch him, but failed. Gabimaru was forced to jump back. He never expected such a massive body to react so quickly. His instincts told him that if he took a direct hit, his flesh and bones would be shattered. That's why Gabimaru stomped his foot down. Using rock lightning foot techniques, he sent a barrage of high-speed rocks towards Yokozuda. Their power was enough to pierce through tree trunks. Meanwhile, the giant took all the hits without a single scratch. Gabimaru then used his ninjutsu, making the cloth wrapped around his waist as tough as steel. Yet it still couldn't wound him. So he repeatedly activated long-range ninjutsu to attack, but to no effect. It was as if Yokozuda's body was invincible. Genji was very weak by now. He advised Shigezi not to try in vain anymore and to run. But she ignored him, insisting on stopping his bleeding with a bandage. Now Genji saw her showing emotions like a normal woman. Sajiri, with tears in her eyes, said, "What does it matter if I'm a man or a woman at this point?" She just didn't want to see her fellow senior perish right before her eyes. Genji finally understood. The way Sajiri accepted duality as part of herself. He acknowledged that she was the embodiment of the middle way. That's why Genji handed his sword to her. "If you're determined to stay on this brutal battlefield, take my sword and decapitate Yokozuda to avenge me and Aizen." Gabimaru on the other side was in disarray because he couldn't fight up close or from a distance. He could barely approach his opponent, only evade. If only there was one more person fighting with him, he might be able to find a blind spot. As he was deep in thought, Yokozuda suddenly cried out as one of his fingers was cut off. Shogizi was back, and stronger than before. By understanding the structure of the body and piercing a sword through the gaps between muscles, tendons, and bones, a Yamada executioner could sever even the strongest bodies. No matter how dangerous the opponent, this principle could be applied. While Gabimaru and Sajiri prepared to fight together, Senna insisted on bandaging Genji's wounds. But Yuzuriha knew he wasn't genuinely kind, so she kept Senna back to observe a bit longer. It's not too late to run after those to die. Gabimaru's plan was to decapitate Yokozuda, but his neck was too high, so he suggested they split up. Sajishi was in charge of cutting Yokozuda's legs from a blind spot to make him stoop, while Gabimaru would counterattack to buy time. Taking that opportunity, Sajishi moved behind him and slashed at the joint between his legs. However, her blade couldn't penetrate his thick skin. She reminded herself to stay calm, push all emotions aside, and let reason guide her. Gabimaru signaled to try again, but after blocking Yokozuda's punch this time, his legs were trembling uncontrollably. Meanwhile, Sajiri failed to sever his leg. She realized it was very difficult to cut through Yokozuda's bones when he was in a rage. His movements narrowed the gaps between his bones, leaving no space for her blade to pierce. Normally, decapitation is performed when the condemned bows their head. To kill Yokozuda with a single blow, he had to be forced to bow down. But how to make him do that was the crucial question. As they were discussing tactics, they heard a gurgling sound from Yokozuda's stomach. He suddenly burst into violent tears, his wails echoing as if to assault the listener's ears. Hunger made Yokozuda lose all reason, and he lunged at Gabimaru, burying half of his body under rocks and earth. Miraculously, he still managed to struggle free. However, blood gushed like a river. Even though he was conscious, his body couldn't move. In his desperation, Sojizi gathered all her courage and stood in front of Gabimaru. She calmed herself, then lightly flicked her sword, preventing Yokozuda's punch from harming her. Sajishi turned emotion into strength, using reason to track her target. She didn't choose one or the other. She chose both and harmonized them. Even Uchiha had to exclaim in admiration. Senna explained that the Yamada family's rank wasn't determined solely by pure skill, but also by suitability for family leadership. Because Sajizi was a woman, she was ranked only 12th, even though her swordsmanship was better than the current number 1. Indeed, Sajizi was continuously showcasing her abilities. She used her sword to deflect all of the giant's powerful punches, and finally made him collapse to the ground from exhaustion. Sajishi immediately seized this opportunity, flashing behind Yokozuda's nape, but he quickly leaped back to dodge. However, the time she bought to save Gabimaru was enough for him to devise a new plan. The moment he activated fire release on himself, Yuzuriha sniffed out danger and urged Senna to leave immediately. Gabimaru unleashed his rock lightning foot fire release ninjutsu, then kicked them towards Yokozuda. He immediately flailed his arms, deflecting them in different directions. Gabimaru continued to attack Yokozuda with fire release. Though it couldn't burn him, it made him so frustrated he nearly cried. Of course, Gabimaru's goal wasn't just that. He was trying to use his life force to burn down the entire forest. Uzuziha ran while explaining to Senna, they're intentionally burning the fresh branches. This makes Yokozuda cry out in anger, leading him to gasp for air and inhale a lot of smoke. Then he'll suffer carbon monoxide poisoning. This method would force Yokozuda to bow down to prevent the toxic gases from entering his lungs. This posture would be perfect for Shigizi to deliver her most practiced strike. Yokozuda tried to attack her, but Gabimaru blocked him, then firmly pinned his arms down for her to easily do her work. Sajizi's mind was as calm as water as she gently slashed. Yokozuda's childhood flashed before his eyes, always hungry, always feeling lonely because he had no one to play with. But in this moment, Yokozuda felt a strange warmth as Sajishi caressed and comforted him. Even though he had committed many evil deeds, she still wished him peace. The flames grew larger and larger. Sagaji had to flee with Gabimaru, leaving Genji's body behind. Memories of the past brought tears to her eyes. If she didn't want anyone else to die, she had to become stronger. The flames attracted the island's monsters, drawing them to the blaze. While natural creatures usually avoid such things, Gabimaru thought he should follow the direction they came from. The monster's ecosystem was the only clue to the elixir of life, so even if he didn't want to, he had to track it to the end to reunite with his wife soon. Sajizi also had to put aside her concern for the other executioners and focus on finding the elixir with her comrades as quickly as possible. After frantically running from the fire, the two encountered Jujijiha and Senna standing right ahead. Beneath the thick fog was a small village. If this is really Shinzenkyo, where legendary hermits once lived, that would be something. In another development, brothers Chobai and Toma had just finished off a wave of monsters. Chobai drank their blood like water, then asked what those hermits his brother mentioned were. Toma explained they were an immortal species. Most of them looked like old men and used mysterious incantations. Chobai didn't care about such nonsense stories. If they were real, he'd kill them all and find the elixir of life. As they were talking, they heard strange sounds. Chobai immediately went to investigate and found two strange naked girls kissing each other. Their flawless beauty made Toma's eyes widen. However, he was a bit puzzled as to how they could be so casually making out in the wilderness. The blonde girl was both surprised and angry that humans could reach this far. Meanwhile, the pink-haired girl next to her found the two brothers intriguing and invited them to come play with her. The blonde girl scolded her for being crude. Then her body and voice gradually transformed into a tall, muscular man. On Gabimaru's side, he was no longer surprised by the strange things here. The important thing was whether the hermits were their friends or enemies. Gabimaru then noticed someone watching him from behind. He immediately gave chase and quickly caught the pink-haired child, unsure if she was from the mainland or a local resident. Before he could recover from the shock, a towering tree swung its branch to attack him. At this moment, the other three arrived. Jujijiha asked, "Is this some kind of bonsai creature?" While everyone was still curious about the tree, the little girl suddenly ran off. Gabimaru immediately chased after her, thinking she knew something about the island. He then circled around, lightly dodged the tree's attack, and kicked it towards the other three for them to deal with. Sajas quickly followed him, leaving Zuzuziya and Senna to face the tree trunk. Yuzuziya surprisingly took off Senna's glasses because she didn't want him to see her skills yet. Saying that, she drank something that made her body secrete a viscous fluid. Seizing this opportunity, she had to test if her new ninjutsu worked on monsters. Gabimaru was now hot on the little girl's heels. Despite her small size, she was incredibly fast, and she even tripped our hero, sending him tumbling. Gabimaru was so astonished his eyes widened. He never imagined such a small child with slender arms could do something like that. Now Shigizi had arrived. She spoke up, saying she had no ill intentions and only wanted to ask the girl a few questions. Surprisingly, the girl stopped at her words. Sajizi thought she had successfully reasoned with her, but the girl just waited for her to get close before throwing a punch. Fortunately, Gabimaru appeared in time to block the blow for her. The terrifying force not only repelled him, but also made a seasoned ninja like him cough up blood. It wasn't like Yokozuda's overwhelming strength. It seemed this was just a fraction of the girl's pure power. Gabimaru didn't know if this was a human or not, but at least seeing the child made him want to resolve things gently. He remembered his wife waiting at home. He needed to complete his mission as soon as possible, so he had to resort to the strongest measures. Specifically, he used vines from the forest to tie the girl up tightly and hang her from a bridge. Seeing Gabimaru's terrifying face and hearing his threat, the pink-haired girl was so scared she burst into tears. Even after being released, she wouldn't stop crying. Sagaji had to hold and comfort the girl for her to stop screaming. This was enough to show that she was just a normal child. When they returned to Yuzuziha and Senda, the wooden man had also been dealt with. Gabimaru was eager to extract information from the girl. However, she hadn't stopped crying, so he couldn't ask anything. Suddenly, the wooden man trembled and urged them to return the girl to him. In exchange, he would take everyone home. It was the first time they heard an island creature speak, which startled the whole group. Only Zuzuziya calmly refused the wooden man's offer. He then tried to tempt her with food, but it was no use. But when he uttered the two words hot bath, Zuzuziya gleefully followed him immediately. Sagaji didn't know if this was the right move, and Gabamaru didn't care who the opponent was. As long as he provided information about the elixir of life, it was fine. If he tried anything, he could send him packing in a heartbeat. The group followed the wooden man for a while and reached a desolate village, shrouded in eerie, thick fog. The wooden man explained that 1,000 years ago, it didn't look like this, then took everyone to his home to rest. The decorations in the house were very old. Gabamaru suspected this guy was lying and didn't actually live here. The wooden man insisted he was trustworthy, so Gabamaru temporarily believed him and prepared a list of questions for answers. However, Zuzuziho wanted to bathe first, then ask whatever they wanted. Gabamaru said there was no time for this. But in the end, Zuzuziha still soaked herself in the bath. He angrily scolded Senna for not being strict with her. This grandpa and grandchild are executioners, yet they have no authority whatsoever. Jujutsu Kaisen advised Gabamaru not to overwork himself. Instead of feeling like an old man, he should join her in the bath. Shogizi also entered the bath with Zuzuziha, saying she would supervise her on Senna's behalf. But as soon as her feet touched the water, she couldn't resist its allure. Suddenly, the pink-haired girl poked Sajizi's shoulder, placed a towel next to her, and dashed out. While they were comfortably bathing, Senna wanted to drink water, but Gabamaru wouldn't allow it due to safety concerns. Just then, the wooden man brought in a platter of fresh, delicious fruit, making Senna's mouth water profusely. Seeing that Senna was desperate, Gabamaru told him to eat. Then he asked about the relationship between the wooden man and the pink-haired girl. But this was a secret the wooden man couldn't reveal. Gabamaru then told him to tell him about the island and the location of the elixir of life. Unfortunately, as soon as he spoke, Zuzuziha rushed in to interrupt. A moment later, they all sat down to eat heartily. Only Sajizi and Gabamaru ate nothing. The wooden man recounted that this place was Shinsenkyo, where the gods lived, and the elixir of life they were searching for was called Dan, the source of eternal life. The island was divided into 3 areas. The coast and forest were Asu, the village they were in was called Hojo, and Dan was in Horai, the island's center. Senna excitedly jumped up, having gathered useful information. Conversely, Gabamaru was also overjoyed to know the elixir of life existed. This meant he could return to his wife. Nevertheless, Gabamaru still needed concrete proof of its existence. The wooden man said he would meet the Tensen sooner or later. Then you won't want to believe, but you'll have to. Of course, the 2 individuals Chobai and Toma encountered were precisely the ones the wooden man referred to. Even though Chobai had cut him in half, the blonde man's body could regenerate as before. Even when Chobai brought down his axe, he effortlessly blocked it with one hand, shattering the weapon into 100 pieces. They could defeat the Rinshi, but the Tensen were on another level. The wooden man welcomed them so warmly because this was as far as they could get. Everyone who came to the island met the same fate, death. Even strong people like the Chobai brothers were beaten to a pulp, which explains the problem. Gabamaru and Jujujiho both pointed their weapons at the wooden man, but he calmly insisted he was telling the truth. The Tensen killed all who encroached on the island, because they were the most important beings on the island. They commanded the Rinshi and punished the wicked, specifically those who came to the island with ulterior motives. After being beaten and broken, Toma was thrown into a pit filled with the corpses of previous expedition members, all transformed into beautiful but deadly fragrant flowers. Seeing his brother about to share their fate, Toma immediately ran over and ripped off the plants clinging to his brother. The island's incarnations into flowers became the source of Dan. The wooden man proved it was no legend by breaking his own arm, then regenerating it as new. Not to mention, he had lived for thousands of years. Gabamaru wondered if the pink-haired girl was like him, but was immediately scolded by Sagaji and Jujujiha not to point his sword at others. The wooden man reiterated one last time that this was Shinsenkyo. The fate of those who entered was decided by the gods, and the chance of leaving this island was almost 0. A moment later, Saijishi followed Gabamaru to wash his wounds, even though she had almost fallen asleep earlier. After getting more information, he condensed to main points. The elixir of life was in Harai and protected by the Tensen. Sajizi still had some doubts about the wooden man Hoko and the girl Mei. They were born and raised on this island for centuries. All they wanted was to continue living quietly, not caring about gods or elixirs. She didn't deny everything Hoko said, but she couldn't accept the truth about the Tensen yet. According to Senna, the Tensen were high-ranking hermits, and Harai or similar terms were all foreign Taoist concepts. Gabamaru advised her to focus on finding the elixir. Other matters can be looked into later. With that, he entered the bathroom to find Mei already there. The moment she saw his face, she burst into tears. But Gabamaru not only didn't care, he nonchalantly stripped off his shirt in front of her. In my village, everyone bathes together. What's the big deal? The 2 girls stared blankly at the crisscrossing scars on Gabamaru's back. Sajizi also noticed a large scar on Mei's tiny body. Looking closer, the girl's hair and skin weren't as soft as they should be for her age. There was bath soap in the bathroom, but no signs of it being used. Sajizi suspected Mei didn't have parents to teach her how to use it. Conveniently, there was also a young man on the other side who had never had a proper bath, so she immediately revamped the bathroom, separating the male and female spaces. Then taught Mei how to shampoo and bathe perfectly like a textbook. Gabamaru, while bathing, remembered his wife. He actually disliked bathing because he felt his fighting instinct was washed away with the water. In the end, his wife would always pour water over his head. She called herself the strategist and him the general, telling him he had to listen to her advice to rest at the right time. Conversely, Gabamaru also had some orders for his strategist. He didn't want her to hide the scar under her. hair anymore. She was incredibly moved upon hearing this. In truth, she just liked styling her hair that way, but her husband's support made her even happier. So now Gabby Maju also advised May not to be ashamed of the scar on her body, because he knew a woman with a large scar, but no one in the world was more beautiful than her. Hearing this, May ran to grab his shirt. She no longer feared him as before. Meanwhile, Shagazi's view of Gabimaru also gradually changed. Perhaps he wasn't entirely a bad person and was slowly changing bit by bit. However, as the moment of rest and relaxation passed, Gabimaru returned to the harsh reality. He suddenly remembered his top priority was to rescue his wife, rather than wasting time here chatting idly. Returning to Tenza's past, he was once a street youth, scorned and looked down upon by society. Born and raised in the slums, his parents couldn't afford to raise him, so Tenza left home. He did everything to earn money except murder. He grew up living under the open sky. Tenza accidentally ran into a group of samurai on the street. They intended to gang up on him, but were surprised when he beat them senseless. Just as he was about to smash this guy's face, a Yamada executioner appeared. He pointed his sword at Tenza and told him to stop. Back to the present. Tenza and Nozogai were wandering on the beach, searching for a countercurrent, but it seemed the scorching sun was about to incinerate them both. Tenza snapped at the pessimism of the girl next to him. This is the best idea a god tier like me could come up with. The forest was full of dangerous bugs and monsters, so he didn't want to leave Nozogai in there. This made the girl like him even more. She was determined to marry this good boy. Tenza surrendered to her stubbornness. Marriage could wait until they survived and left this place, for now. They had to avoid combat as much as possible to ensure their safety. But man proposes, God disposes. They unluckily ran into a girl who descended from the sky onto the sea. This person also had the ability to change gender fluidly, meaning she was one of the Tensen. Tenza immediately shouted, "This freak is a monster," and fled into the forest. But the orange-haired one instantly cut them off. With just one blast from his hand, Stenza was knocked into the base of a tree. Nozogai panicked and tried to run to her future husband, but the orange-haired one blocked her, asking, "Have a problem with abnormalities? Because personally, I absolutely despise it." Saying that, he prepared to attack, but Nozogai's reflexes were faster. Even the next blow couldn't touch a single strand of her hair. Nozogai even used this opportunity to jump back towards Tenja, who was lying unconscious on a tree branch. The orange-haired one complimented her movement speed for a human, then slowly approached them. Just then, Tenza swung his sword, slashing the orange-haired one across the face. Yet he healed the wound instantly. Witnessing this shocked him. He warned Nozogai not to join the fight under any circumstances. Tenza, though not intelligent, was proud of his sword speed. Only a few masterful sword slashes were seen, and in a flash, the orange-haired one's body parts were severed. Tenja and Nozogai seized this opportunity and ran deeper into the forest. They thought they had escaped this time, but the other guy reattached his body parts and approached Tenza, scolding him for ruining his clothes. Just as he blocked their path, a sword flew past, severing his head as fast as the wind. Tenza turned around, saw his master, and cheered. As a result, his master urged him to run even faster. He proudly introduced his master, Shin. Meanwhile, Nozogai was astonished to discover that this person was blind yet ran like the wind. Tesla then explained that his master could see by sensing smells and sounds. After running frantically for a while, the three stopped to catch their breath. Tenza was out of breath but still managed to tell Nozogai, "With master here, you don't have to worry about anything anymore." Just as he was boasting about his master, he got a rap on the head, and his master pointed out many mistakes of his foolish student. Tenza relied too much on speed, while his movements were extremely sloppy. Facing such an opponent, he should aim for the head or legs first. Every slash had to be precise. Each reminder came with a rap on Tenza's head, embarrassing him greatly. Nevertheless, he felt relieved to have his master there. Shin was also glad his disciple was well. He thought the last time he'd seen the kid was on the boat. Now, Tenza realized his master was alone without a prisoner. Shin explained he had completed his duty and was preparing to return home. However, he couldn't find a single current leading off the island. But after much searching, he finally found one single exit. However, Shin heard a sound and detected a presence he had never encountered before. That was also a challenge for a blind person like Tenza. So he returned to look for others to form a team and return together. Tenza immediately asked to join. But first, Shin made him explain why he was protecting a criminal. An executioner has the right to execute a prisoner if they violate rules or encounter unexpected situations. Shin had done so when his female prisoner suddenly tried to seduce him, so he had executed her as gently as possible. My master is so swift and decisive. Meanwhile, you enthusiastically assist a prisoner. If Tenza can give a satisfactory reason, Shin will reconsider. Tenzin said Nozogai had committed no crime, but Shin had memorized most of the contents of the death row list and knew their circumstances. But the era they lived in defined what constituted a crime. The Yamada clan was merely the blade of the era. They had no right to choose who it cut. Above all, violating rules was considered an act of treason against the Yamada clan. One person's impulsive actions could threaten the safety of everyone else. Tenza immediately retorted that his master himself had taught him how to wield a sword. Shin had saved a homeless person like Tenza back then because he sensed the resourcefulness and potential within the boy. Tenza asserted that the same applied to him. Nozogai didn't deserve to pay with her life. She had great potential for growth if given freedom. Shin was quite surprised by his disciple's sudden maturity. Tenza said it was all thanks to his master's guidance. Moreover, he knew his master was a good person and understood what he was saying. From a kid who didn't care about helping others, he's now determined to protect a criminal. Shin will let it slide for now, but if she threatens the Yamada or Tenja clans, then forget it. The two were shocked when the master realized Nozogai was a girl, and Shin quickly smoothed things over, saying he had eyes too. At this moment, Shin and Nozogai officially greeted each other, excitedly wanting to go to the reverse flow. Lin was reminded by the master not to babble. The biggest threat they faced was the orange-haired monster, so they needed a proper strategy to deal with it. Sure enough, as soon as they mentioned Cao Cao appeared. Luckily, Shin reacted quickly and dragged the other to safety, but his throat was already bleeding badly, while the orange-haired one's intention was to take his head. The enraged man charged forward, unleashing a barrage of slashes. However, the orange-haired one was accustomed to this speed and easily dodged. The difficult situation forced him to use the one-sword style. The sword swung so fast that an ordinary person couldn't see it. Yet, the orange-haired one not only dodged but also closed in on him, flaking him lightly and piercing for holes in his body. He remembered Tenya once asking why the master helped someone like him. Shin did find Tenya quite rude but saw the potential within him. Every time Tenza trained with his sword, his emotions overshadowed his reason. Perhaps it was because he didn't want to become a samurai himself. Xian didn't force his disciple to follow the rules of a samurai from the start. But one day, Tenza would find something he wanted to protect, and then his swordsmanship skills would surely help him. However, until now, Tenza had only received contempt from outsiders. Since birth, he had no status or money. He had no potential or anything. Seeing Tenzin wanting to give up sword training, Shin set a condition. If he could land one blow on him, he would accept. Tenza didn't bother doing the chores, so he sneaked out the next morning. Unluckily, he ran into Aizen. He led him to visit his brother Zhang's grave. Tessin was as undisciplined as Tenza. He had talent, but lacked motivation. While Shin focused on improving his skills, Tessin wanted to live his own way and left the dojo. Not even a day later, Shin had to execute a criminal, but the one under his blade was Tessin. Though he hesitated for a moment, but then Shin still had to kill his brother as an executioner. Tessie's last words were, "I'm sorry, master." From then on, Shin became passionate about teaching and helping people. After his conversation with Aizen, Tenza immediately returned to the dojo and challenged his master. This was the first time he had been so serious about training. He failed again and again, but Tenza refused to give up and kept charging forward. Shin was the first to believe in his potential, while he himself had no faith in himself. By now, Tenza was very weak, losing so much blood that his fingertips were icy cold. His vision blurred, his chest burned as if it would explode. He felt death closer than ever, but his master and Nozogai over there needed his protection. So Tenza mustered all his remaining strength, rushing forward to punch the great celestial in front of him. Even if he had to die here, he had to buy them time to escape. However, after taking that barrage, everyone could also see something different. If you can see something different, then share it with your friends. The orange-haired one still had enough strength to tear the man's throat. Shin had stopped the bleeding by now. He drew his sword and charged to rescue his disciple. Tenza struggled to get up, urging his master to run. Unfortunately, his throat was so sore he couldn't utter a word. Tenza cried out in vain. It seemed there was a telepathic connection between master and disciple. Shin, who was charging forward, suddenly stopped, then swallowed his bitterness and unexpectedly grabbed Nozogai and ran. Tenza was just waiting for that. He spun around and punched the monster, not missing a single blow. Actually, he had dreamed of a future in a humble cottage with Nozogai, but dreams are just dreams. Shin only stopped after running far from danger. Nozogai cried bitterly, asking him why he abandoned Tenzin. "Isn't he your disciple?" Ironically, that was precisely why Shin did it. Tenza had sacrificed his life to buy them time to escape. He couldn't waste the chance that the boy had traded his life for. Though he couldn't do anything now, Shin would make them pay. He still remembered Tenzin's delighted expression when he defeated him that day. The kid could have left but chose to stay. Back with Gabimaru's group, Senna searched around the village. He found nothing useful and became even more confused because there were too many mysteries to solve. Senna's head felt like it would explode from processing too much information at once. That's why the night before, he collapsed and slept like a log. Gabimaru took this opportunity to find more clues. He had no more time to hesitate. The thick fog made it impossible for him to see. But if the wooden person's words were true, continuing south would lead him to Horai. Sure enough, after leaving the forest, Gabimaru reached an open field with terrifying whispers hidden in the mist. Looking closely, he saw withered trees with clasped hands chanting. They looked similar to Hoko, but didn't react when he approached, so he guessed they couldn't move. Senna had warned that acting alone was dangerous, but Gabimaru couldn't return without the elixir of life. Moving forward was his only option now. Gabimaru rushed forward, unaware that Mei was hiding behind a tree. He actually reached the gate to Horai, the dwelling of gods and hermits. Gabimaru looked up at the colossal gate, seemingly man-made. If this was Horai, the elixir of life must be inside. As he was about to open the gate and step in, the orange-haired one suddenly appeared behind Gabimaru. He widened his eyes, assessing the foe before him, who was both similar and different from a human. He didn't know what kind of creature it was. The orange-haired one blocked him, sat down, and grumbled. "Why does it always have to be me?" Then she told Gabimaru to scram. She had just fought Shin's group and wasn't in the mood for fighting, even though her mission was to capture all the humans on the island. Gabimaru heard this and immediately guessed that they could turn humans into the elixir of life. After saying this, both sides stared at each other in silence, then charged into battle. While the orange-haired one stared in surprise at her broken, dangling arm, Gabimaru delivered another kick to her head, spinning it 360 degrees. The orange-haired one quickly recovered and lunged at him, but couldn't grab him. Gabimaru saw that his opponent was no ordinary foe and continued to press his attack, giving her no time to react. After spinning and delivering 3 consecutive kicks to the orange-haired one's head, he activated his ninjutsu, Scorching Flame, burning her. But even burnt black, the orange-haired one still had enough strength to punch Gabimaru into the wall, then transformed into a man, preparing to take his body back to make the elixir. But Gabimaru was still alive and well after his attack, making him doubt everything, wondering if this was even human. Both sides once again engaged in an intense fist fight. The orange-haired one punched Gabimaru, sending him flying to the floor. But his arm was also lost after that blow. The orange-haired one complained that Gabimaru was too stubborn, but this was the first time he had encountered someone so strong in several hundred years. Gabimaru only cared about the location of the elixir of life. Seeing the orange-haired one didn't answer, he lunged again. Just as he realized physical attacks were becoming useless, the orange-haired one suddenly unleashed an extremely powerful surge of energy. Gabimaru dodged one blow, but if this continued, he would be pushed into a severely disadvantageous position. Gabimaru tried to buy time to analyze and plan a counterattack, then delivered a direct kick to the orange-haired one's stomach, making him vomit a torrent of blood. Even so, he didn't understand why his attack was effective. The orange-haired one reverted to her female form and gathered energy in her palm. She unleashed a long-range attack, and Gabimaru vomited blood and collapsed to the ground. Before he could fully recover from his shock, the opponent unleashed a barrage of punches from a considerable distance. Gabimaru could only raise his arms to block, taking countless damage. This feeling was exactly like when Mei punched him in the forest. Even though he knew defending was useless, he couldn't do anything else. Just as he was about to give up, the image of his beloved wife appeared before his eyes. Gabimaru wouldn't allow himself to fall now. The desire to reunite with his wife fueled him with new strength, and he charged forward, exchanging blows with his enemy. Gabimaru had to return. Even if his eyes and nose were torn apart, he had to go back to his wife. The more he thought, the faster Gabimaru's attack speed increased exponentially. If his opponent had regeneration, he would tear her to shreds faster than she could recover. So after 1,001 light-speed punches, Gabimaru turned the orange-haired one's body into a honeycomb, then forced her to reveal the location of the elixir of life. At this point, the orange-haired one had no choice but to use her trump card. Countless flowers bloomed on her body. Gradually, they enveloped her body and formed a giant, extremely grotesque flower. Gabimaru calmed himself. This wasn't the first time he had fought a monster. He just needed to analyze his opponent and counterattack precisely. However, in this form, her power was absolute. The electricity she emitted ripped apart the ground, making it tremble violently. Gabimaru struggled out of the debris, gasping for breath but still charging to attack. However, he couldn't penetrate her tentacles, and he was electrocuted by the blooming flowers. Gabimaru intended to use Scorching Flame to burn her once more, but his body had already reached its limit. Even a simple movement was excruciatingly painful. The monster continued its relentless assault. Gabimaru was in so much pain he didn't know if he was dreaming or awake. He woke up to see his wife sitting beside him. He looked around in confusion, thinking it was just a nightmare, but tears still streamed down his face. While his wife went to make tea, Gabimaru looked around their familiar home, then quickly realized the cruel truth. He could only apologize to his wife, for he couldn't return anymore. The monster squeezed Gabimaru's body. Blood splattered, but it wasn't his blood. The ninja's iron rule number 20. If faced with death, use all remaining strength to inflict maximum damage on the enemy before dying. Gabimaru directly unleashed Scorching Flame on himself, wanting to perish with the Great Celestial. But in the end, he only managed to burn 2 of its tendrils. Gabimaru was out of strength, about to apologize to his wife before dying, when Mei suddenly appeared beside him. She created a protective barrier around them both, then slid down the cliff face and plunged into the abyss. The orange-haired guy quickly recovered. He wondered what Mei was doing here. In another scene, Senta bowed his head, apologizing for letting Gabimaru escape. He had actually tried to find him last night, but the further he went, the thicker the fog became, making it impossible to see anything. Hoko explained that ordinary people would find it difficult to cross that fog. Sajiri guessed Gabimaru was heading for Harai and immediately demanded they go find him. Yuzuriya objected, not wanting to put herself in danger. Besides, the executioners didn't care about the prisoners' lives. Why should Sajiri bother with Gabimaru? Turns out, Hoko wanted to go to Harai because Mei was missing, and he could safely guide them through the fog. Hearing this, Yuzuriya did a complete 180, grabbing Sagiri's arm and leg, claiming she was so worried about Gabimaru. Along the way, she asked the wooden man about the Great Tensen, and he told her they were 7 hermits, who were casually sitting in Harai, discussing whether they preferred men or women. While they were passionately chatting, the purple-haired guy appeared, announcing that some strong humans had recently shown up on the island, and killed quite a few Daishin. The blonde-haired guy immediately blamed Jufin for being careless, from letting the guys escape on the beach to struggling with another outside the gate last night. With that, he flicked a teacup at Jufin's head, then mocked him for letting an ordinary human force him to transform into his monstrous form to fight. After using too much elixir in his battle with Gabamaru last night, his body had become unbelievably old and withered. Jufa was quickly reminded by the purple-haired leader that everyone here was family, and no one was allowed to harm each other. Furthermore, he was the only one allowed to physically interact with Jufin. Jufa then reported that he had almost beaten the Cho brothers to death and thrown them into the pit. They must be in full bloom by now. The purple-haired guy advised Jufa not to underestimate them, as the corpse of a Dacian had just been found decapitated. Anyone capable of killing them was not ordinary, and the one who cornered Jufin last night was very different. Sure enough, Chob had carried his younger brother out of the pit, looking much more confident than before. The purple-haired guy then turned back to Jufin, asking if he had killed the one who forced him to transform. Jufin nodded slightly, and the purple-haired guy began pouring some liquid into a cup. After drinking it, Jufin became young again, but his expression was clearly resentful. The wooden man on the other side calmly explained. In the past, a great Tenzin achieved enlightenment and became a saint, then split into 7 parts. Which are the 7 great Tenzin as they are now? They all looked exactly alike, but their personalities and roles differed. However, that was just a legend from when the wooden man was a child. Hearing this, Yuzuriya guessed that Hoko used to be a leaf back then. Turns out, he and the other island dwellers once looked human, and the villages were quite prosperous until 1,000 years ago. The people lived longer, but their bodies gradually transformed into trees. Before losing consciousness, all gathered here, so their souls could be invited into Harai after death. Hoko's family had also transformed. Sadly, his daughter was the first, and he was the last remaining. Harai was the final resting place for souls. The great Tenzin were gods who chose who entered, and anyone who challenged their power would face death. At this moment, Sajiri wished for only one thing, that Gabamaru was safe, and indeed, he was. After being saved by Mei and falling into the abyss, Gabamaru concluded that the great Tenzin were nothing more than monsters, so he could devise a plan to fight them. Just as he needed more people for this, Tamiya and Fuchi appeared right behind him. As soon as Tamiya saw Gabamaru, he scoffed. Gabamaru looked as tattered as a rag, but the image of his stomach being pierced by Gabamaru flashed before Tamiya's eyes. Even so, in his current state, Tamiya warned Gabamaru not to be reckless if he didn't want to die. Gabamaru himself knew it was difficult to defeat Tamiya without injury. From Tamiya's stance, he deduced that the left side of his body had no power. This meant Tamiya's left arm was severely injured. At this point, both sides knew the result of a bloody battle would be the death of both. Fuchi quickly stepped forward, telling them not to waste time on pointless matters. Tamiya, however, thought otherwise. All battles begin by observing the opponent's preliminary movements. Fuchi insisted that a show of force was unnecessary. What they should do now was gather information from Gabamaru's side. He had a way to achieve that without fighting. So he drew his sword and asked Gabamaru if he was confident he could defeat both of them. Knowing he was at a disadvantage, Gabamaru immediately changed tactics, bowing and asking them to cooperate with him. Tamiya immediately drew his sword and struck down with lightning speed. Yet Gabamaru remained seated, unfazed, proving that the kid had no intention of tricking him. However, that disappointed Tamiya. He needed strong warriors, not cowards who easily bowed before enemies. Fuchi scoffed at Tamiya's short-sightedness. He wanted to know the real reason Gabamaru accepted bowing without hesitation. After hearing him recount his battle with one of the great Tenzin, Tamiya and Fuchi were dumbfounded, while Tamiya wondered why he hadn't met a worthy opponent. Fuchi was more interested in their extraordinary regenerative abilities. Of course, Gabamaru was completely in the dark as well. He only wanted to earn a pardon to return to his wife, and he would do anything to achieve that. While Fuchi was skeptical, more evidence proved Gabamaru's words were true. Tamiya immediately agreed, not caring about the pardon but wanting to become immortal. Fuchi thought he would drink the elixir himself, until he burst out laughing, saying that method was too boring. What Tamiya aimed for was for his name to echo across the land and become a legend. His image would be recorded in history books for all eternity. Fuchi considered that goal utterly irrational, but no one taxed dreams, so Tamiya could dream on. Actually, he didn't care about Tamiya's far-fetched dreams, but he was very interested in those immortal creatures. He was already ready to dissect them as soon as Tamiya brought them down. And so, a 3-person alliance was formed, each with different objectives. The first thing Fuchi wanted to know was, who was this pink-haired girl? Gabamaru couldn't hide his surprise at how much Mei had suddenly grown. And now, she could even talk. Gabamaru immediately rushed over, telling Mei to give him information about the elixir, then apologizing to her for being so desperate. At the same time, he thanked Mei for saving his life. Gabamaru wanted to know if her power was similar to the great Tenzin, but the girl said nothing. Meanwhile, after connecting the pieces of information he had with Hoko's story, Senna concluded that this place was not Shinsenkyo, but clearly a religious system created by humans. Words like Harai or the names of the great Tenzin were terms used by various religions. All the disparate elements came from specific cultural interpretations. They were crudely mixed, while specific eras and cultures were superficially connected. Eventually, all evidence pointed to the name Mozo Mejiza, the founder of a new religion with a plot to overthrow the shogunate. The religion he founded was quite similar to this place, because they were patched together from different religions. That's why Senna had always felt this place was rather flawed, not just in its beliefs, but also the monsters and the island's structure. He believed someone had created this island. There had even been people who returned without mutating, concluding that they could find the elixir and go home. After rambling on, Senna realized he had said too much. Sajiri, however, greatly praised his ability. Aside from guarding, Senna was actually very reliable. Meanwhile, Yuzuriha pointed out a crucial issue. If what Senna said was true, this distorted ideal had lasted for 1,000 years. Could they defeat them? And they still didn't know if Gabimaru and Mei were alive or dead. Sajiri was sure he was still alive. He might even be making plans and executing them to reunite with his loved one. Indeed, Gabimaru was trying to persuade Mei to reveal the Great Tensen's secret and how to defeat them. Since Mei's language was still incomplete, she could only summarize it with one word, Tao, followed by a few other words accompanied by extremely confusing gestures. Gabimaru didn't understand what Mei was trying to convey. Hearing the word Tao, Fuchi explained it was chakra in Chinese medicine. At the same time, Hoko was explaining to the others that Tao was the power flowing through all things. Everything in this world was created by the flow of Tao. Understanding Tao meant touching the origin of the universe. Yuzuriha listened to the explanation, but understood nothing. If only there was a handsome teacher here, she might have understood 80 to 90%. In another development, Nozagai was ambushing Shin from behind a tree, yet Shin disarmed her without even turning around. Shin told Nozagai to do as she wished. He still maintained his stance of not teaching her swordsmanship. Nozagai earnestly begged her master to teach her to avenge Tenza. However, Shin didn't want to see any more children die in front of him, so he refused to teach Nozagai swordsmanship and also refused to be called her master. Nozagai cried, tearing at her clothes, saying she couldn't bear to watch those she loved die one by one. So she only hoped Shin would take her as his disciple. Shin explained this wasn't something learned in a day or two. Everything in the world had its own specific rhythm. That's why Shin, despite being blind, could perceive Nozagai's height, and even her haibun. Using these rhythms not only improved the senses, but also enhanced human physical abilities. Shin taught Nozagai to range her thoughts to feel them, neither too intense nor too still. This was also the Tao that Mei and Hoko mentioned. Each person had a different explanation, but they all pointed to the same thing. Shin instructed Nozagai to achieve a state of balance between rage and serenity. Only then could she easily detect the waves. This state of mind allowed one to surpass their normal abilities, but this was not an easy skill to acquire immediately. If Nozagai's sword grip was still wrong, it would be a long time before she mastered it. So Shin taught the girl the correct grip. Just then, a large monster appeared right behind Shin. Shin smoothly dodged, severing its arm and head. The speed of the sword was also something Nozagai needed to pay attention to. If she cut into the fat, the blade would be sharper. With that, he immediately demonstrated how a master swordsman wielded a blade. Nozagai immediately drew her sword and followed suit before her master changed his mind. Even if Shin could defeat the Dashin, he stood no chance against the Great Tensen. He still needed to hone his skills, but on this island, such a luxury wasn't available. Now, many Dashin were also gathering near Gabimaru. Tamiya immediately charged forward, sweeping away the first wave with a single move. The quickest way to understand Tao was to practice it. Fortunately, there were plenty of monsters for him to freely practice on. With that, Tamiya lifted Mei onto his shoulders so she could teach him the power of Tao. Meanwhile, Gabimaru spotted another individual, different from the Dashin, hiding in the fog. With a chaotic scene outside, the Great Tensen were happily practicing their spelling. As they were about to get more elixir from the Chobe brothers thrown into the pit, they were confident no one could escape that pit. Meanwhile, Chobe was using all his strength to help his brother climb up. Chobe swore he would kill them no matter what. Seeing his brother's resolve, Toma relented and began planning their attack. Chobe arrogantly said he didn't need a plan, as he had discovered the Great Tensen's weakness lay in their lower body. When he cleaved the blonde-haired guy in two, his body began to regenerate from the bottom up, not from the heart or head. Just like plants. So they needed to attack the roots, not the crown. After saying that, Chobe casually broke off a gray arm from the pit and ate it. Just as a grotesque-faced individual appeared, the two brothers immediately retreated, while the opponent introduced himself as being sent to investigate by order of the Great Tensen. Other Doshi had also found their way to the humans, specifically the one observing Gabimaru's group. Unlike the Dashin, who had many flaws and were not allowed into Horai, the Doshi directly served the Great Tensen and were their right-hand men. This Doshi demanded the two brothers return to the pit to complete the elixir refining process. Before he could finish, Chobe charged forward to attack. The Doshi punched Chobe squarely in the face, but Chobe grabbed his arm and broke it in an instant. The Doshi was surprised that a mere mortal could absorb Tao. If peace wasn't possible, he was ready to kill them both. Chobe told Toma to deal with the Dashin so he could focus on his specialty. And so, after a few flashes of his sword, everything was quickly resolved. The Doshi showed no fear, because like the flow of Tao, he knew Chobe was slowly running out of strength. Chobe charged forward in a frenzy, but without using Tao, it was useless. The Doshi could regenerate his body in a flash. After letting Chobe tire himself out, he unleashed a blow that sent him sprawling to the ground. Toma, seeing his brother fall, rushed to him but was blocked by the Dashin. The Doshi was about to grab Chobe's head and throw him into the pit, but Chobe seized the opportunity to tear off the Doshi's face, surprising even his younger brother. Chobe told Toma to go back and handle the Dashin, shocking the Doshi for a second time as Chobe's throat had healed. Perhaps being thrown into the elixir pit had changed Chobe's body. Even more surprisingly, Chobe could now see the glowing ore from the Doshi, which ordinary humans could not detect. The opponent stood there, stunned. Chobe guessed he had hit a nerve. That glowing aura must be the key to killing the Great Tensen. At this moment, Chobe's Tao suddenly surged, realizing the sky was too dangerous. The Doshi had to kill him immediately before things went further. And so, Chobe was hit twice from a distance because he hadn't clearly seen the Tao. His arms were then broken from blocking a direct attack. But after only a few seconds they returned to their original state. He even managed to land a punch on the Doshi. Chobe's Tao continuously increased, making the Doshi fearful. This power had surpassed human limits. Toma knew his brother was a master of adaptation, but this astonishing speed also made him doubt. In fact, Chobe himself wasn't sure what was happening. He just felt his body was high as if on drugs. Chobe wasn't afraid of transforming into a monster, because nothing in this world lasted forever, except one thing. He recalled the day he and his brother were dragged back to a bandit's lair. Seeing them as handsome and bright, they planned to cut the faces of the two boys to satisfy their lust. Toma was chosen first, but Chobe proactively took a knife and cut his own face instead of his brother's. This made the bandits hesitate, a flashback to the past, but now Chobe was overcoming all attacks and lunging at the Doshi, landing a blow to his gut, making him spit blood. Indeed, his judgment was spot on. Faced with Chobe's ever-increasing power, the Doshi could only attack from a distance, but unfortunately for him, Chobe saw through it and dodged perfectly. Chobe could now see the Tao swirling around his opponent's body. Hearing this, the Doshi panicked and called for 500 Dashin to protect him. But Toma had already cleared them all out. As disheartened as the Doshi was, Chobe was equally excited. He challenged him to show more, then stomped on his hand. Sensing how his opponent was gathering power, Chobe immediately put it into practice. With his very first blow, he punched a hole through the Doshi's body. The unrecoverable wound made him shriek in agony. Contrary to Chobe's triumphant look, he could now even see the Doshi's death through the Tao. Chobe stomped on the bleeding wound again, bringing a definitive end to his opponent. Toma silently observed the scars on his brother's body from behind. They were growing larger, causing him concern. Just then, Chobe turned around and asked his brother what was wrong, his face momentarily distorted. Toma wondered if he had misseen. He was happy his brother was alive, but those vine-like scars were just suspicious. Coincidentally and surprisingly, Mei's scars also had similar marks. The only difference was that she didn't need to fight. She just sat on Tamiya's shoulders, teaching him to use Tao. However, the girl could only say a few words, so Tamiya understood nothing. He kept trying different moves to test it, but still wasn't successful. Seeing Gabimaru constantly laying waste to the monsters on the other side, Tamiya asked Mei if that was good enough. However, the Hollow received a similar assessment to him. Fuchi was excitedly examining the monster corpses, because their internal structures were not the same. Although their exteriors were quite similar, one had the inside of a fish, while the other resembled a human. From this, he concluded, each monster had a different weakness, and the pink-haired girl was also an enigma. Gabimaru recalled the time he nearly died. Mei had used a mysterious power to carve through the cliff and escape. An ordinary person couldn't do that. His intense stare made Mei cry out in fright. Tamiya saw this and scolded Gabimaru not to flirt with girls like that. Gabimaru didn't care because he already had a wife. Tamiya explained he didn't mean it that way. It was just that Gabimaru was his disciple now, so he was forbidden from making women cry. Gabimaru kicked off a monster's head and declared he was no one's disciple. Fuchi overheard their argument. He felt the Hollow was more human than the rumors suggested. The Doshi, who had been motionless until now, saw Mei and immediately ambushed Tamiya, then used his robe to ensnare Mei and pull her towards him. The Doshi reverently knelt, saying he had been searching for Mei for a very long time. It had been centuries since she was expelled from the palace and disappeared from Horai, leaving the 500 Doshi extremely disappointed. Although Juthan forbade them from searching for Mei, he was lucky to find her here today and wanted her to return with him. Then, the Doshi told Gabimaru's group that Mei looked human but ate meat like the Tenzin. Gabimaru knew Mei wasn't human, but he never expected her to have such a special identity. Seeing the Doshi beg Mei to return to Horai and lead them, Gabimaru pondered what to do with Mei. But as soon as he saw her terror-filled eyes, he didn't hesitate, jumping in front of Mei to shield her, surprising both allies and opponents. Even he was surprised by his impulsive action. Although he didn't know the full truth, Gabimaru didn't want Mei to cry again. The Doshi called Gabimaru a nuisance, then called for reinforcements to turn them all into elixir. Immediately after, centipedes and butterflies swarmed them as the Doshi were their masters. While Gabimaru carefully thought about how to approach them, Tamiya charged ahead, slashing at the centipedes. He thanked them for taking his left arm, because now his swordsmanship was even stronger. While he was talking excitedly, the Doshi immediately shot a blast at Tamiya's face. Gabimaru immediately realized it was an invisible attack and warned Tamiya not to act recklessly. Just then, the centipede Doshi charged at Gabimaru, while Tamiya fought fiercely with the butterfly controller. As a result, due to the close distance, Gabimaru accidentally punched Tamiya. The Doshi disdainfully told them they were not his match, and had nothing to do with Mei, so why bother protecting her? Gabimaru admitted he was right. However, ever since he set foot on this island, he had become a different person. Besides, what was wrong with repaying someone who saved him? Gabimaru just wondered why the Doshi were so obsessed with Mei. They openly replied that they studied Tao, and Mei was a crucial link in that process. There were 5 steps to mastering Tao. The final and most important was Fong Trung Thut Chamber Art. Chamber Art required a partner as it involved the circulation between yin and yang. Tamiya didn't understand, so Fuchi explained it was Taoist sexual cultivation. Understanding now, Tamiya could only exclaim how crude this was. but the Doshi leader considered it a noble form of cultivation. All things possessed either yin or yang qi. One must develop their Tao to the point where both flowed freely. The great Tenzin were the ones who developed this technique and had been practicing it for thousands of years. Thanks to the flexible circulation of yin and yang, the great Tenzin had the ability to change genders. Meanwhile, ordinary beings only possess one gender. So the Doshi needed a partner to circulate yin and yang, and Mei's yin qi quality was the highest. Although Mei shared the same origin as the great Tenzin, she only possessed yin qi, which led to her expulsion from the palace. He gave her two choices: die like a stray dog, or stay in Horai as a training partner for the Doshi. The scars on Mei's body were proof of that. Unfortunately, she escaped soon after, preventing them from continuing their cultivation. The more Tamiya heard, the more disgusted he became. Gabimaru beside him also glared fiercely at the two Doshi. Mei's situation was no different from his wife's. He would not accept them being treated as objects. The two Doshi, realizing they couldn't turn their opponents into elixir, immediately merged with the centipedes and butterflies to kill them all. Tamiya leaped up, slashing off one Doshi's wing. Swarms of butterflies flew at him, but he dodged them. However, after inhaling poisonous gas, he collapsed to the ground. At the same time, Gabimaru used fire magic to burn the centipede Doshi's arm. The Doshi quickly activated his Linshu divine finger technique and shot Tao towards Gabimaru. Gabimaru had to jump back to dodge the attack. The swarm of butterflies was just waiting for the opportunity to attack, but Gabimaru used fireballs to create a wall of fire, blocking their path. The centipede leader stopped his comrades from continuing their attack, fearing they might hit Mei. Gabimaru took this opportunity to observe their power. He vaguely felt the Tao, but it wasn't enough to defeat the enemy. Just then, Fuchi enlightened him, explaining that only with a calm mind could one perceive Tao. To verify, he asked Mei to help him feel the Tao by touching him. Gabimaru also felt something when Mei held his hand. Fuchi advised him to quiet his mind, but in the middle of a battle, that was too difficult to do. Suddenly, Mei said that weakness was the seed of strength. Combined with Sagri's words, Gabimaru clearly saw the flow of Tao. Therefore, when he returned to the battle, none of the enemy's attacks could touch him. This time, Gabimaru didn't rush his attacks, but calmly predicted the enemy's intentions and attack directions through the Tao. He also perceived everything around him by accepting his own weakness. He understood how Sajiri moved forward while being blindfolded. Seeing the Z-monster's attack, Gabimaru only needed one hand to strip away its outer Z-armor and defeat it. Even the butterfly leader who tried to ambush him met the same fate. At this point, he confessed that 3 Doshi were ordered to monitor the humans, because the great Tenzin sensed that the people who came to the island this time were on a different level. He wanted to surrender, but secretly formed a hand seal behind his back, controlling the centipedes. Gabimaru immediately leaped over Tamiya's head, unleashing a fiery kick at them. Then he rushed straight to the butterfly leader. At the same time, Tamiya cleaved the centipede leader in half below. In another development, Hoko led the group to Harai, only for Munin to snap his head off with a flick of his hand. He was very surprised, as it was the first time in 1,000 years that anyone had gotten this far. Although Yuzuriha felt she couldn't match him, she immediately turned and ran for her life, but was unfortunately caught by him in a flash. Sagari's face darkened, knowing Munin was far superior to them all. However, she still drew her sword and demanded he release Yuzuriha. Hoko, though decapitated, was still alive and said he was a great Tenzin. Munin chuckled, saying that wasn't enough to kill Hoko, but it would accelerate the transformation process and turn him into a tree. Hoko accepted this fate, only hoping his soul would be invited into Horai. Turns out, Munin bluntly revealed that all talk of souls and religion was just a sham made up by the master to maintain order on the island. This island was originally a place for conducting experiments on life. Hoko and all the others were just part of the experiment, and those who came to the island were research material. For example, the Kyoshi were created by Munin from explorers who came to the island, making them easy to toy with. Meanwhile, those with noble dispositions would be transformed into elixir, or the elixir of immortality that people often spoke of. However, these only worked on the great Tenzin. If ordinary people consumed them, they would turn into trees. Proof was that the people in Hoko's village could live forever, but did not achieve the youth they desired. To this day, the great Tenzin were still researching a way to fix this, but had not found any promising results. Hearing this, Sajiri thought of Gabimaru. No elixir meant no pardon. Meanwhile, Munin announced their journey had come to an end. Now they just needed to obediently follow him. The words had barely left his mouth when Yuzuriha beside him disappeared. Before Munin could react, she launched a kunai, making him spit blood, and then decapitated him. Yuzuriha thought she had escaped Munin, immediately running to tell Sajiri to leave. But Sajiri remained frozen. Yuzuriha had to remind Sajiri that the top priority was survival. However, just as they were about to flee, Munin regenerated his head. He ordered the Kyoshi to chase Yuzuriha, then detonated them to hold her back. But she managed to dodge in time. Yuzuriha also saw and could use Tao. The only difference was that in her village, people called it Ki. Munin believed she hadn't fully grasped the uses of Tao, so he intended to teach her again. Senna suddenly stepped forward, saying if he wanted to kill her, he would have to go through him first. Munin acknowledged that Senna and Sajiri had some talent, but he had already chosen Yuzuriha. He even wanted to cultivate with her. She was skilled enough. Sajiri was surprised Senna drew his sword for a criminal. She wondered if he had feelings for Yuzuriha. Then Munin unexpectedly struck, sending her flying backward. He explained this move was executed by gathering and activating Tao. However, Yuzuriha didn't need to learn this move. He would show her much better ones. The words had barely left his mouth when Muten's leg was cut off by Senta. But Yuzuriha didn't need his help, because she had decided to go all out with her trump card. After drinking something, Yuzuriha's entire body secreted a sticky fluid, which then combined with soft ninjutsu, allowing her to transform the liquids she just secreted into solids for attack. Next, a series of ninja arts cut Muten in half, yet he easily regenerated his body. He even commented that she should improve her abilities. Senta cut out Muten's eye, asking Yuzuriha to team up with him to defeat this monster. So, both continuously launched attacks at their opponent, but they didn't hit Muten and even hindered each other. Finally, Yuzuriha was caught by his leg and wrapped around his body. After observing how she used Tao, Muten lost interest and concluded she was not suitable for him. Nevertheless, he extended his arms, welcoming them to Harai, the land of invulnerable gods. Now Sajiri struggled to ask the wooden man about the great Tensen's weaknesses. Hoko still considered Muten a god and accepted divine punishment. Sajiri understood his feelings, but if this continued, they would all be killed. Hoko also wouldn't be able to see Mei again. Indeed, as soon as he heard that name, his eyes changed. As soon as she grasped their weakness, Sajiri immediately joined the fight, even though her opponent openly disdained her. Nevertheless, she resolutely charged forward, simultaneously throwing her sword into Muten's stomach, then twisting the blade to cut through his dantian and navel. Legend said that Tao was born from the dantian, flowed through the body, and returned again. If that spot was injured, Muten could be killed. However, Sajiri didn't have enough Tao to do that. No matter how he was cut, Muten regenerated. He believed none of the three here could kill him. Suddenly, Sagiri's Tao surged, and she unleashed a slash towards Muten. Thanks to his agility, he dodged the fatal blow. However, the wound on his face bled continuously. This meant the wound could not regenerate. In fact, Sajiri had seen a part of the aura when she approached Muten. If that was Tao, then she knew how to cut it, because she had previously seen Gabimaru with a similar aura, and even Yokozuda, the giant of Bijin, had it too. Due to the recent attack, Muten's attention shifted to Sajiri. He was eager to turn her into a useful elixir. Therefore, Muten used the Fang Zhongshu, Earth Unite travel technique and instantly disappeared. Sajiri was almost dead if Yuzuriha hadn't intervened in time to stop him. She explained Muten hadn't disappeared, but had only condensed his Tao, so they wouldn't detect him. This move was quite similar to her substitution technique, which was why she caught him off guard. Sajiri calmly composed herself to strike. However, Muten acted faster. He ordered the Kyoshi to kill Yuzuriha, but Senna swiftly dealt with them. The unfavorable situation forced Muten to bite off his own arm to escape, while simultaneously launching a blast towards Yuzuriha. She immediately jumped over Senna's head, letting him take the blow for her. Sajiri also continuously unleashed lightning-fast sword strikes. Maintaining her breath while attacking gradually drained her strength. But with the harmonious coordination of the three, Muten was now just a torso lying on the ground. Just when they thought it was endgame, he suddenly floated up by controlling the Tao in the atmosphere. After transforming his body into a woman, Muten rained down thousands of Tao rays, causing the ground to shake violently. The three quickly ran for their lives. Senna unfortunately took a hit and fell flat on his face. Meanwhile, Sagiri's nose was bleeding profusely, and her vision was blurring. Just as she was about to give up everything, Yuzuriha's voice encouraged her not to give up yet. She believed this was a sign that the enemy was worried. Muten had to dodge all of Sagiri's attacks because her Tao was his bane. Not to mention he was just a monster, not a god, so there must be a way to kill him. Yuzuriha chugged another vial of fluid, then used her sticky fluid to grab Muten's leg. She was willing to endure a barrage of Tao rays just to pull him to the ground, making it easier for her teammates to act. Senna stabbed him from behind, risking his life to hold Muten, waiting for Sajiri to charge forward and cut across his stomach. Finally, after the efforts of all three, Muten lay motionless in a pool of blood. Just fighting one was this difficult, and there were 6 more like him. Their power far exceeded human understanding and Hoko's descriptions. However, the biggest problem now was that the elixir didn't exist. As Sajiri worried, Yuzuriha suggested taking the gold here to compensate for the lack of elixir. While she was happy with the pile of gold, Sajiri quietly asked Senna if he had feelings for her. Hearing this, he jumped and denied it. In fact, he was just jealous of her freedom. Senna wanted to be an artist but was forced by his parents to follow the family profession. While he didn't like being a Yamata or sword tester, Senna hated killing, so he spent a lot of time rationalizing it. This was why he was knowledgeable about many different religions. Even more ironic was that because of his hard work, Senna's rank kept climbing. Finally, he gave up his dream and began fulfilling his responsibilities. Until Yuzuriha saw through his facade, Senna was repeatedly bewildered by her seemingly contradictory personality. Sometimes cold-blooded and utterly ruthless, Senna was both envious and admired that freedom, even though he knew it was taboo for an executioner to admire a criminal. Sajiri, after hearing this, deeply empathized with Senna, as she felt similarly about Gabimaru. At the same time, on the Hollow's side, he was asking Mei why she was following him. Then he thanked her for saving his life twice. Fuchi, seeing this, suddenly remembered Sagiri's comment about Gabimaru. He wasn't as heartless as his nickname suggested. His true self only clearly emerged when a specific person was mentioned. Witnessing this aftersight firsthand made Fuchi curious if it significantly affected his work. Just then, Gabimaru suddenly had a nosebleed and passed out. Meanwhile, Yuzuriya discovered many flowers growing where Mutin died. Suddenly, a flower lunged to attack her, but Senna shielded her with his body. The lives he had taken flashed before his eyes, but Yuzuriya appeared and shattered them all. Her presence breathed new life into Senna's bleak existence. He didn't need much, he just wanted to watch over her from afar. At this moment, Senna's body was slowly blooming, while Mutin had transformed into a demonic combat state with both genders. Just as he was about to attack the two girls with hundreds of flowers, Shin appeared in the nick of time, slicing them all apart. He calmly told Nozogai to cut the flowers and vines on Senna's body, to slow down the blooming process, then take everyone away from there. Based on movement, the scent and sound of the ripples, Shin recognized this was the one who killed Tenza, his poor student. On his way here, Shin had experimented on different monsters to test the use and nature of the waves, also known as Tao. Now he would prove to Mutin that even immortals could die. Indeed, as soon as the enemy launched an attack, Shin merely drew his sword and cut them into 100 pieces. The flowers had stopped growing on Senna, but he was currently losing too much blood. Yuzuriya took out a vial of hemostatic medicine, but Senna refused to use it. Sajiri was worried about both the big man and Shin fighting alone out there. Nozogai reassured her to calm down because her master was very strong. The girl believed her master couldn't die here. Just as Nozogai said, Shin was fighting Mutin on equal terms with countless deadly blows, forcing him to use a barrage of Tao bullets, shattering the gate to Horai. In the blinding smoke and dust, the sword shot out, piercing Mutin's stomach. Immediately after, Shin appeared, landing another blow that sent him reeling. Yuzuriya couldn't help but widen her eyes and gape. Nozogai proudly said her master was, of course, strong. Sajiri particularly noted that Mutin couldn't regenerate. Shin's Tao really affected him. Although his test was effective, countless roses suddenly bloomed on his body. Mutin cunningly used the small cuts to plant flower seeds there, intending to turn Shin into elixir. Turns out, he ruthlessly cut off all their roots. Blood soaked his clothes but didn't deter him or discourage him. However, losing too much blood made Shin worry he wouldn't last until he sent this monster to his grave. Sajiri saw this and wanted to help him, while Yuzuriya chose to stay. Suddenly, Nozogai approached and hugged her, then turned and hugged Sajiri. Indeed, doing so made her feel a bit more energized. The thing was, Nozogai had done this with her grandfather before. Recently, she also tried it with her master and received a similar response. Shin didn't understand how Nozogai did this, but he asked the girl to stop hugging him so tightly. Instead, a light touch was enough for him to feel it. Sajiri, upon hearing this, drew a conclusion. There were positive interactions that increased another's Tao, but then she immediately dismissed that thought. There was no more time to think. As long as she could move, she had to fight. Sajiri said the monster's weakness was its danshin. They had to attack its core to have a chance of winning. The problem was that Mutin now had to danshins. Moreover, one scratch from him would kill them instantly. That's why Sajiri and Nozogai wrapped themselves in ice and Yuzuriya's sticky fluid, both to prevent cuts and to stop pollen from entering their bodies. Sajiri and Nozogai would act as bait and attack from the front, creating an opportunity for Shin to get close and cut off Mutin's danshin. While they were discussing, he unexpectedly advanced and attacked Nozogai. Luckily, the girl agilely dodged in time. However, Mutin's speed was also no joke. As soon as he slipped behind Nozogai, Sajiri immediately charged forward to block the blow and save the girl. Her fast and precise sword strike surprised Shin, sensing that Sajiri was predicting Mutin's movements based on Tao, even faster and more accurately than himself. Shin was extremely satisfied and proceeded to carry out her plan. He ran, slicing off the stamens. Mutin immediately rained down thousands of spores, but not a single hair on Shin's leg was touched. In fact, the two girls behind him cut off all the remaining stamens. Shin only waited for the chance to rush towards Mutin. Using all his strength, he cut off one of his legs, then immediately cut off the other. Finally, Mutin was felled with a thud. Its body's regeneration speed was also becoming slower. However, Sajiri was now vomiting blood. Shin's condition on the other side was even worse than hers. Mutin ecstatically rained down more spores. While Sajiri and Nozogai ran like crazy, Shin continued to advance. As hatred grew stronger within him, Shin couldn't forgive himself for abandoning Tenza at that time. Therefore, even if he died here, he had to drag this monster down with him. Shin's Tao surged like a storm. Mutin tried to swat him away with his hand but was pinned down by the two girls. At the decisive moment, Shin hesitated, not striking down, because he didn't feel a strong wave emanating from there. Just then, Senna shouted, "Its real weakness is the ovule." Because if the great Tensen was a plant, the ovule was its danshin. Shin followed Senna's words, immediately unleashing an unstoppable sword strike. The fatal blow completely annihilated Mutin. Before vanishing into nothingness, Mutin revealed a face that couldn't be happier, as he had waited for this moment for 1,000 years. And now it had finally come true. Mutin's death left behind hundreds of vibrant flowers blooming before the gate of Harai. However, the serious problem now was that Senna and Shin were on the verge of death from blood loss. While Yuzuriya only had one dose of medicine left, she believed Shin should be the one to take that dose because Senna was already very weak. Even facing death, he felt no fear. Instead, he felt happy to die in the arms of the one he always admired. That night, Sajiri stood speechless before Senna's grave. She thanked Yuzuriya for helping her understand many things. Whether they were executioners or criminals no longer mattered now. They just needed to strive to return alive. Meanwhile, Gabamaru finally woke up from his trance. He looked around cautiously, asking where he was. Fuchi replied that they were hiding in a cave halfway up the valley wall, but he had no memory of this. Meanwhile, Sagari's group was venturing deeper into Harai. Yuzuriya rummaged through some clothes, intending to change. Nuzugai wanted to wear a dress, making Zuzuziho wonder why a boy would want to wear one. While they bickered, Shion advised Shigezi to relax a bit before dealing with the chaos on the other side. He began to connect the pieces of information. First, the source of power called Tao. Mastering it grants superhuman abilities, but overused depletes stamina faster. Not to mention the side effects of mental or physical changes. Or it could even affect one's consciousness or memories. In the gravest cases, Tao abuse leads to death. The mention of life and death reminded Jujutsu too of the elixir of life. Something just confirmed to be a myth. However, Sajuzi believed it existed because Gabamaru once said his village chief was immortal. But Jujuji has said it might just be an illusion. Shinobi often shows someone a supernatural phenomenon when they are young, to easily control and manipulate them. That memory would be ingrained in their subconscious, making them unable to harm the one who instilled it. Does Uziha knew this because her village used similar methods? Even the wife Gabamaru often mentioned. It was highly likely to be part of an illusion, as Sajishi had never heard him mention his wife's name. Gabamaru was confused, wondering why he was here, and if the people in front of him were friends or foes. All he remembered was being the Hollow, the greatest ninja of Iwagaku's village. Gabamaru planned to subtly gather information while resting. If they discovered him, he'd have to strike. May quickly noticed that Gabamaru was different from before. Meanwhile, Sajuz on the other side was losing sleep over what she had just heard. Not even Shin's jokes could cheer her up. It was only the third night on the island, and almost all their comrades were dead. Not to mention Gabamaru being completely out of touch, leaving her unable to calm down. Shin was surprised, thinking Sajuzi had fallen in love. But she dismissed it, because he always thought about romance first. In truth, Sagaji hadn't defined her feelings for Gabamaru. But if what Yuzuziha said was true, she couldn't help but feel sorry for him. A young man used as a killing machine with a deceived belief. Nevertheless, Sajishi believed Gabamaru wouldn't give up and would return alive. Inside an old Japanese-style house, under flickering, eerie candlelight, Shogun officials sat in a circle. There was Zika, the only one who returned from Shinsen Island, and Hanga, his assistant. The Shogun's leader demanded the purple-haired man recount in detail everything that happened on the island. He recounted it painstakingly. Earlier, under orders from the general to find the elixir of immortality, he had set sail 2 days prior with condemned criminals and assassins. Zika was tasked with supervising the killer Buddha convict, but before he could even set foot on the island, he was killed by Trone. Thus, he expressed great disappointment at not completing his mission, reluctantly deciding to turn back. But the returning boat was pushed back to the island by the current, leaving him helpless on the shore. While he was engrossed in his story, the leader cut him off. Too surprised that he had set foot on the island, he wondered what happened to the other 60 people. He considered giving up the mission, but thinking of his responsibility to bring the last words of the condemned prisoners back to their families, he regained his resolve to complete the task. At this point, he didn't tell the full story, but shortened it, vaguely saying that a few things happened, making the listeners more curious and wanting him to elaborate. But Zika was too lazy because the story was too long. Telling it would take too much time and effort. He advised against going there because it was a very strange place, and added a taunt that the shogunate were fools for poking a hornet's nest. This made the leader furious, his face turning red as he berated the boy. But the boy remained calm, maintaining his arrogant attitude. Fortunately, his clever, understanding assistant, always by his side, helped him at the right moment. The assistant immediately bowed, taking the blame for him. The officials were unwilling to forgive him, thinking it was just an assassin who dared to be so arrogant. He needed to be taught a lesson in etiquette. But thanks to a close aide who knew his value in visiting the island, the leader's expression changed, and he gently overlooked his arrogance. Zika maintained his defiant expression. The leader read the general's decree that the Yamaya family must send outstanding candidates to Shinsen Island once more to monitor those already there. Done, he and his assistant departed under the bright guiding moonlight. The assistant chastised him for his rude attitude in front of the shogunate, but he merely chuckled, relying on the assistant to handle everything properly. The assistant frowned, wanting Zika to have the demeanor of a samurai. He just gave a cold, faint smile, admitting his fault casually, and let the assistant jump behind him again. He walked, hand on chin, eyes closed in thought, wondering if any of the condemned prisoners would be useful. It was known that the next group to land on the island was from the Ikwij ninja village. This group was very ruthless. The condemned prisoners sent to the island before were all killed by these village ninjas. The general, hearing the news, excitedly called for the ninjas to appear. The chief of Ikwij village, with a strange and peculiar face, also seized the opportunity to meet the general, asking him to retrieve an item he had left on the island. The assistant felt indignant at the opportunism of these schemers and also informed Zika that he would be going to Shenzhen Island with him in a few days. Hearing this, he widened his eyes, vehemently refused to go. Looking utterly exhausted and unwilling to set foot there again, he looked at his assistant, tears streaming down his cheeks. Those were tears of anxiety and worry, because Master Essen had promised to send news to days in advance, no matter what. But it was already the third day, and there was still no word from him. Not only had they lost contact with Adson, but with other close associates as well. That always filled the assistant with worry for their safety. Zika replied that he was also worried, but his face was indifferent, as if he didn't care. The assistant became more resolute, deciding that the two of them would go to the island themselves to complete the mission for sure. As they were talking, a voice interrupted them. A commoner, looking fearful, pointed towards the huge head of a monster on the island. Zika had gone to great lengths to bring this head back, wanting to show it to the officials, so they would believe it was a dangerous island. But now, there was no longer an opportunity. He had wasted effort dragging the anchor all the way here, only for it to be useless in the end. Zika, quick-witted, immediately ran to the commoner, sweet-talking him into letting him lead him to the red light district or back to his room, making the man blush with embarrassment. While the commoner was held tight, the assistant touched the monster's corpse, but the other person warned him that it was still alive. The assistant, also a master, could sense the life force of creatures and realized this monster had been dead for a long time. The assistant sternly called for Zika to leave. He ran after him like a clinging child. The two met the remaining two at the rendezvous point to depart, and this time, Zika would join the group. He chuckled foolishly, wondering when he had agreed. At that moment, they set off together, heading towards that demonic island. They had arrived at Sinsen Island. At this moment, Jean was calmly lecturing his attendant about how using Tao consumes one's own life force. If used too much, both body and soul would be affected. The more one uses it, the clearer the price to pay would manifest on the body. The attendant, with his low-level understanding, couldn't grasp what the purple-haired man was saying. Mid-sentence, the fairy interrupted him sharply. She scolded them for always talking about complicated things and warned the attendant not to stay there any longer. The attendant quickly bowed an apology. This joyful fairy changed her mood faster than a rice paper sheet. One moment frowning, the next she was laughing and joking. She led Jean and the attendant outside, excitedly showing off the new training hall. The purple-haired man coldly, emotionlessly offered a few compliments to please the fairy. The training hall had a large pool for both land and water-breathing exercises, with flashing multicolored lights like a music hall, surrounded by grotesque monsters cultivating. They played musical instruments to maintain harmony within the microcosmic orbit. The fairy introduced a room she was proud of, the harmonious chamber. While she was proudly showing it off, the orange-haired man, lying and reading, interjected, calling her a fool, which left her surprised and speechless with indignation. According to the orange-haired man, the key to the harmonious chamber was the circulation of yin and yang. Maintaining a neutral balance was sufficient. However, Jean, with his vast knowledge, retorted with a remark that left everyone dumbfounded. Inside that mystical, ethereal room, Chufa was merging with another person. He exerted all his strength, to the point that the one merging with him burst apart. Pieces of flesh splattered on the walls, and syrup drenched both the bed and Chufa. Despite being treated so violently, the other person continued to praise him. He just coldly walked out. As soon as he left the door, he immediately met Tafa, who praised his dedication. She invited him to drink elixir. Tired from just merging, he eagerly wanted to savor musin, a drink pressed from human heads and vibrant flowers. The fairy had just poured it and handed it to Chufa, but quickly pulled it back, remembering she hadn't added the luminescent substance to make the drink glow. She turned to ask Crazy, who was drinking water, but the orange-haired one also didn't know. The city of Sinsen appeared amidst layers, surrounded by thousands of fragrant flowers. Inside the city, Soggy and her companions were considering their next move. She feared that staying put in the city would soon make them targets for the enemy, so she firmly suggested the group move to the main gate. At this moment, her eyes accidentally fell upon Zuzi's outfit and couldn't help but criticize its revealing coolness. However, contrary to the executioner's strictness, both the master and the young boy strongly agreed, leaving Shaggy no choice but to reluctantly accept. Their crucial goal now was to reunite with Gabby and May. However, the alluring ninja poured cold water on their hopes, claiming the quest for the elixir was utterly impossible. She reminded them of the overwhelming divine beings and grotesque demons besieging the island, then expressed her exhaustion, wanting only to desert and escape this hell. Faced with such selfishness, Soggy shattered the purple-haired ninja's intention to give up with a fierce declaration. Everyone must go together. Leave this horrifying island together, and absolutely no one will be left behind. That resolute spirit was so strong it even swayed a cunning old fox like Yuji, making him blush with admiration. Though still worried about whether Gabby would make it to the rendezvous point, hope ignited when they saw a massive explosion tear a hole in the city wall, a fierce signature that only Gabby could create. The atmosphere lifted, and everyone united under Sagari's lead. However, as soon as they reunited, the story of Gabby's wife plunged the entire group into a whirlwind of questions, leaving them unsure how to cope. On the treacherous mountain path towards Sinsen City for their reunion, Gantet, walking beside him, kept jumping, disbelieving this was the right way. Gabby just bowed his head, saying nothing, his mind a chaotic mess as his memories had not fully recovered. Looking back, he found this quest for the elixir absurd, wondering why he had gotten involved, or if there was truly another reason behind it. He desperately tried to remember but failed, only seeing the blurred figure of a girl, revealing his clear unease and melancholy. Fuji, seeing this, kindly asked if he was all right, but he still insisted he was fine. Just 3 steps later, a terrifying aura erupted. Appearing before the group was a tall, blonde man wearing a giant beaded necklace, leaving everyone wide-eyed with astonishment. It was Chobe and his younger brother Toma. He sneered, looking down on Gabby's group as mere low-class commoners, while everyone was still trying to figure out if they should ally. Chobe gave a strange smile and delivered a merciless kick towards Gabby. Fortunately, Gabby managed to block it in time. Gabby's group simply wanted to cooperate to leave the island, but Chobe was extremely arrogant, showing off his superiority and unwilling to join forces with anyone. He cared for nothing but crushing Gabby, and the two lunged into a fierce battle. Gabby quickly slipped into a headlock on the blonde man and coldly snapped his neck. Chobe fell instantly. They thought they had easily finished off the ruthless bandit, but he was no ordinary foe. Barely had he taunted them when his wounds miraculously healed. Chobe roared, tossing Gabby away and slamming him hard to the ground, making the entire accompanying group realize they were facing a true monster. Gabby realized this was the one dominating the island, unable to be dealt with conventionally. He had to find a way to subdue him to extract information. He unleashed a lightning kick, but Chobe countered, grabbing his leg and forcefully throwing him to the ground. He gave a sinister smile, thinking Gabby had surrendered, but with his tough nature, Gabby was determined to tear this blonde man into 100 pieces. He gently pulled his bandana over his bleeding face, his hand clenched, pointing directly at the enemy. Gabby unleashed his ultimate eye technique, Flower Pin, firing a stone at incredible speed. Chobe dodged, but before he could gloat, Gabby closed in, delivering a devastating kick to his face followed by a flurry of punches that left him dizzy. Seizing the advantage, Gabby gouged his eyes out, thinking that losing his eyes would end the immortal. It didn't. Chobe roared in a frenzy, delivering a powerful counter kick to Gabby's face, sending him flying a long distance to everyone's astonishment. He stood tall before Gabby, coldly restoring his gouged eye and severed leg tendons in the blink of an eye. His mouth ceaselessly mocked that someone who looked like a gentleman would fight so dirty. Gabby flew into a rage, unleashing countless deadly blows, but Chobe dodged them all in his frenzy. He leaped onto him, biting off a chunk of flesh directly from the carotid artery on his shoulder, causing blood to spurt like a volcano. Outside, the spectators couldn't help but shiver, marveling at the strength of these two madmen. The battle was no longer martial arts but a clash between two ferocious beasts. Gabby told himself that as a ninja of Ikage village, he must never surrender to any opponent. He would fight until the enemy was completely defeated. However, this immortal blonde man continued to regenerate his wounds at astonishing speed. Enraged, Chobe stomped his foot, shattering the ground into 100 pieces as if to swallow Gabby whole. He flexed his muscles, his arm emitting a strange light, then without hesitation, delivered a direct kick to Gabby's face. The blow inflicted excruciating pain, but Gabby managed to retaliate with a punch. Unfortunately, with his skill, Chobe easily dodged it and countered, sending Gabby tumbling. However, in that instant, Gabby still managed to bite off 2 of his fingers. Chobe looked down at his hand, his face expressing disdain for Gabby's petty trick. He healed again with ease. The wound looked horrific, but barely fazed him. Gannett, watching from the sidelines, also began to feel exhausted as the match became a stalemate against the immortal blonde man. The old man recalled how strong Gabby was yesterday. Why was he so weak today? Could it be due to an injury? He realized Gabby's Tao was very strange. It was too fragile. A true Tao must have an interplay between strength and weakness. For weakness is the seed of strength, but in Gabby now, that seed was entirely absent. Gabby was tormented by pain and resurfacing memories of past losses. Forcing himself to regain his will, he charged forward fiercely again, the two relentlessly trading breathless blows. He tore a large chunk of flesh from the blonde man's face, but it healed in a single second. To Gabby's astonishment, Chobe ripped off a large piece in return. He then turned and ordered his younger brother to eliminate the companions. Toma charged like a wild beast, drawing the sword, aiming to strike down the tall old man. The old man outmaneuvered him. Gannett seized weapon and threatened. The man forcefully threw the brother to the ground. Toma's strength was compared to a seasoned master. The old man only needed his bare hands to make him utterly defenseless. Fuchi recognized Toma's sword. He belonged to the Yamaza clan. But to Gannett, he didn't care who the opponent was. Anyone who dared disrespect him would pay with their life. Toma realized the old man had terrifyingly keen instincts, so he decided to attack based on the old man's reflexes. However, all calculations failed. His strike was still parried, and his sword was even pinned under the old man's foot. The old man, knowing he was young and inexperienced, bluntly criticized his poor skills, only knowing how to slash wildly despite his talent. As he spoke, he continuously punched Toma in the face. Looking at his unscarred face, the old man knew immediately that this guy either relied too much on his talent, or he was overly dependent on his brother. Toma fell to his knees in agony. Although the old man offered cooperation, the younger brother refused to yield, as from childhood, all his will had been placed in his older brother. Witnessing deceptive factions since childhood, the two brothers hated aligning with others. For them, only the two of them were enough. Gannett scoffed openly, calling it childish thinking, trying to appear superior, but in reality, just a small, isolated group. However, with just a few provocative words from the old man, Toma's sword-holding technique changed, showing clear improvement. At the same time, a Taoist from Shen appeared, intending to eliminate Mei and Fuji. Thanks to the executioner protecting Mei, everyone could safely focus on their own battles. On Chobe and Gabby's side, the combat continued relentlessly. The immortal blonde man realized his opponent was tough, but he believed perseverance would bring victory. Thanks to the power of Tao, Chobe began to read Gabby's every tactic. He confidently charged, slamming the white-haired young man's head into the ground, shattering Shizuo, lying on the ground. Gabby forced himself to cast aside all pain and focus intently. He exploded, radiating a powerful light and entering a hollow state, remembering his master's words. A ninja must not die easily. If he must die, he must leave the deepest wound on his opponent. Gabby's body began to be engulfed in blazing flames. Though the blonde man was still arrogantly scornful, Gabby suddenly unleashed a swirling fire vortex. Ninja art fire bridge, burning Chobe. Without stopping, he continued to shoot fiery projectiles that pierced the immortal's body. That was the ninja art lightning tier. The consecutive attacks left Chobe no time to recover. Faced with Gabby's death-defying will, Chobe suddenly awakened, exclaiming thank you and deciding to unleash his full power. In his final moments of lucidity, he thought of his brotherly bond, determined not to lose his only younger brother. The battle reached its climax when Fuchi struck down the Taoist with a bloody, eerie knife. Everyone around was shocked. Chobe was now transformed, a mass of red flesh, while Gabby became a blazing, hollow entity. Two monsters confronted each other, neither willing to yield. Who will be the ultimate victor? Seeing his opponent constantly mutating and encircling him with a series of tree-like tentacles, Gabby was forced to move continuously to dodge attacks, yet still couldn't avoid a direct strike from Chobe. However, he maintained his composure to land steadily, then immediately counterattacked with blazing fire bridge techniques. Although the fierce flames engulfed the piles of tree-like roots, their power was still insufficient to subdue the immortal entity. Not letting his opponent catch his breath, the savage god rushed forward, swinging his arm, now transformed into a battle kite, striking down with immense power, while also delivering attacks from the roots, forcing Gabby to activate fire defense amidst the fiery combat. Chobe suddenly found himself confused by his own actions. For some unknown reason, whenever he saw those strange whirlpools, the rage in his heart surged fiercely. He was slowly losing his mind, with only one desire, to end the ninja's life before him. Despite the confusion about everything, the will to destroy his enemy still fiercely urged him on. Gannett wondered why he wasn't using Dao anymore, perhaps waiting until it was too late. But as May explained, due to temporarily blocked memories, Gabby couldn't use Dao smoothly. This put him in a perilous situation if the battle continued to drag on. Facing death, Gabby remained calm, even contemplating sacrificing himself to drag his enemy into the abyss, eliminating the immediate threat. However, each time he tried to execute a suicidal blow, some invisible force held his mind back, even though turning back at this point was extremely difficult. What's more, Chobe actively attacked first, forcing Gabby to ignore that vague restraint. Witnessing the two charge at each other with suicidal intent, those around them were stunned. After all, their goal was to earn a pardon. If they died here, all their efforts up to now would be meaningless. At that moment, Toma suddenly realized that his brother was fighting with his life on the line just to protect him. It was because of the younger brother's weakness that Chobe fell into this dire situation. But was it already too late? Was it too thoughtless to only feel remorse for his brother now? The more he fought, the deeper Chobe plunged into madness, to the point of forgetting his own identity. Before his brother was completely swallowed by darkness, Toma used his entire body to awaken the soul that was gradually transforming into a monster. He bitterly realized that all this time, he thought they were fighting side by side, but in reality, his brother alone bore everything. Because he himself was too timid, too unreliable, his brother had to push himself to this limit. Though to his brother, Toma was just a part. To Toma, his brother was everything. Seeing Gabby wildly charging forward to deliver a mutually destructive blow, May was forced to unleash her power to stop both sides. Before a tragedy occurred, the ground around Gabby suddenly caved in, but he still managed to deliver a punch, sending a stone directly into his opponent's head, leaving him dizzy. With his last shred of consciousness, Chobe managed to get his brother to safety before falling into the bottomless pit himself. After casting her spell, May had no strength left to resist and collapsed into the arms of the old swordsman Gantek. As Shaggy's group approached, everyone was shocked to discover that the tiny girl had transformed into a young, beautiful woman. Through the recent chaotic battle, everyone bitterly realized that this island still held too many terrifying mysteries. Especially when dawn broke, the grotesque statues began to appear distinctly, sending shivers of fear down the group's spines. If all these mysteries were just illusions, then who was behind manipulating everything? As a longtime resident, Old Man knew this place was a land built on deceit. Initially, he had chosen to surrender to fate, but witnessing these people defeat the Celestials rekindled hope within him. They will surely become the variable that changes this island, he mused. Yet he also wondered if he would retain his own self then. Stepping out of the city gate, Sagi's group finally reunited with their other comrades. Nevertheless, countless questions still revolved around May being safe and sound despite expending a large amount of energy. Old Man expressed his sincerest gratitude to Shaggy's group. Moreover, he was astonished to see them still maintain their strength after confronting the demons, and even capturing a Taoist. For a millennium, this was the first time he had seen a glimmer of hope. What this group brought to the island was not merely disruption, but perhaps something far greater than he could imagine. In the past, Sagi occasionally prayed and chatted with the fat brother. So, when she heard of his death, she couldn't help but grieve. Noticing their current numbers were too few, Master Shi suggested the group retreat from the city as quickly as possible. However, the biggest obstacle now was Gabby, who was unconscious and unable to move. Even though May now had the physique of a young woman, to Misagi, she was still a child needing protection. At this moment, the old swordsman Gannet advised Master C not to dream of forming factions to escape. He had generously given that traitor a chance to live, yet he remained silent, prompting the old man to consider ending his life to save trouble. Sagi immediately objected, believing he had his own troubles. She declared she wouldn't let anyone else sacrifice themselves before her eyes. Just as the swordsman was about to settle the dispute with a duel, he was interrupted by Gabby's critical condition. Master Shin saw the ninja's situation was very dire. Perhaps due to excessive use of Dao, his life essence had been severely damaged. Fuji, of course, tried his best to heal Gabby's wounds, but they wouldn't close. Not only was his body injured, but his life essence was also damaged. Suddenly, Gabby woke up and saw a crowd of unfamiliar faces surrounding him. He feigned obedience but absolutely refused to let Sagi approach his wound, asserting that he didn't care about his life. Rising suspicion forced the female samurai to demand his true identity. Gabby closed his eyes, called himself a hollow, then suddenly launched an attack, but was stopped in time. As Sagi predicted, his memories were jumbled due to Dao interference, to the point that Master C could feel his soul eroding. Looking at the tangled injuries, she realized Gabby had fought non-stop since getting lost. No matter how many times he fell, he kept dragging himself up, refusing to rest. Pained by his situation, Sagi slowly approached, questioning him about his reason for being there. She emphasized that if he knew how to use compatibility, he could fully recover his lost memories. Sagi affirmed that she was not an enemy to be wary of, but a trustworthy companion. Nevertheless, the stubborn young man refused help, making her lose patience and resort to force to make him lie still. Sagi felt both exasperated and a little smug, finally getting a chance to get back at Gabby while he was defenseless. Putting aside her grudge, she focused on using her Dao to help the ninja recover. Mei, standing beside them, blushed, knowing this act was similar to the Celestial's harmonious chamber technique, where Dao was circulated through physical contact. Although the method was somewhat strange, Master C noticed that their two energies were perfectly harmonious. After finishing, Shaggy demanded that Gabby cooperate if he wanted to return to the one who was anxiously waiting for him. At that moment, all memories of his gentle wife finally flooded back into the Hollow's mind. In another development, after miraculously surviving the fall, Chobe was stunned to realize that Dao was absorbing a dangerous power beyond his comprehension. Nevertheless, the Bandit King remained undaunted. He yearned to reunite with his brother and viewed the approaching monsters as mere sandbags to train his new strength. At the same time, the group decided to move to the hidden place the old swordsman had found. Here, the old man also wanted to find out how truly terrifying those Celestials were. Recalling the previous battle, Yuji still shivered, having needed 5 people to take down one. Moreover, their disruption of the Celestials' territory would surely be discovered soon. After regaining his memory, Gabby apologized to everyone for the recent troubles, and admitted that he now understood the terrifying power of Dao in the enemy's hands. He understood that if they left the island empty-handed, the group would not receive a pardon and would still face execution by the shogunate. At this point, Yuji suddenly questioned whether the wife in Gabby's memory might just be an illusion created by the village chief. If that were true, the search for the elixir would be meaningless. However, Gabby firmly asserted that his wife was real, because he felt her existence with all his heart. Even though in his confusion he could only recall fragmented details difficult to articulate, the image of his gentle wife with her eyes narrowed when she smiled, her voice and unique scent remained deeply etched in his mind. The warm feeling when she held his hand was something nothing could replicate. The only way he could prove this was to survive and leave the island to see her again. Hearing his confessions, Sagi smiled in agreement, and the old swordsman, respecting his resolve, also agreed to lend a hand. While Gabby spoke, Master C noticed the Dao within him surging powerfully, proof that those with something to protect always possess unparalleled strength. On the other side of the battlefield, after sweeping away the monsters, Chobe encountered Jean, who was ruthlessly hunting down the killer of the Celestials. In another corner of the island, Chobe had confronted the purple-haired man, one of the Celestials. With a cold demeanor, the purple-haired man struck, piercing Chobe's arm, but the wound healed instantly in less than a second. Witnessing that extraordinary regenerative ability, the purple-haired man appeared immensely pleased. Meanwhile, in their hideout, Fuchi decided to forgive the pathetic Taoist. This man seemed to have reformed, no longer wishing to kill, and the two parted ways peacefully. Upon returning to the cave, Fuchi discovered that Mei's condition was unstable. The girl appeared very tired after using her extraordinary power earlier. Despite limited ingredients, Fuchi quickly concocted a simple fever-reducing medicine. However, his face darkened, and he demanded that Mei reveal more information about herself and the Celestials. During his questioning, seeing the girl stammering from exhaustion, Fuchi patiently persevered. After all, he was quite adept at interpreting what she wanted to say. On the mountaintop, Gabby stood calmly before the group. He felt his fighting instincts were no longer as sharp as before, so he wanted to reactivate them by asking everyone to attack him collectively. Hearing the proposal to treat him as a training dummy, the group didn't hold back. Old man Gannett resolutely cut Tama's ropes, preparing for battle. Gabby told himself that after the battle with Chobe, relying too much on Dao was very dangerous, but if he couldn't control it, he would never defeat the immortals. He exhaled, calming his mind to find a way to control this energy. After bowing to thank everyone for their help, the melee began. The group pounced like hungry tigers. Toma slashed wildly, but Gabby dodged easily. With just a slight push, sensing the Dao, he sent Toma flying aside. Old man Gannes launched a deadly blow from behind, but Gabby also anticipated it. Gabby somersaulted and delivered a gentle kick that made the old man retreat. He realized he couldn't surpass the Celestials in Dao cultivation experience, but he could optimize its use, easily dodging Nuju's slash. He grabbed the girl's collar, while simultaneously blocking the rapid attacks of 3 others. Gabby grasped the principle. The greater the force exerted, the stronger the recoil. Nozagai and the entire group praised his rapid progress without reservation. Master C approached, further explaining that if he could utilize each type of elemental attribute with the appropriate compatibility, he could completely send the immortals to a permanent exit. Suddenly, Thomas stepped before Old Man Gannett. He knelt, deeply moved, earnestly asking the old man to teach him practical swordsmanship, so he could survive on this island by his own strength. To prove his resolve, he decisively cut off his long hair with his sword. This action even astonished Old Man Gannett. He stood up, asked the boy to step aside, and began to teach him. Although Thomas secretly harbored the strong intention to rescue his brother, he kept hidden the secret that he might have to eliminate these people if they became obstacles. On another front, Chobe was in an extremely difficult situation against the overwhelming power of the purple-haired Celestial. He clapped his hands, sneering at the distorted Dao Chobe possessed. He revealed that the elixir flowers were turning humans into elixirs, and Chobe's Dao was gradually being absorbed. However, miraculously, Chobe maintained consciousness amidst the mutation. The Celestial created dazzling orbs of light, constantly attacking to test his opponent's limits. Chobe used all his instincts, running as fast as he could to dodge the rain of death orbs. He knew that a single slip-up would lead to his immediate defeat. A burning aura surged. Chobe's blood vessels now stood out like fiery red roots beneath his skin. He was determined not to let himself be swallowed by darkness. That resilience astonished the Celestial. Chobe charged, unleashing a barrage of tree-like tentacles in a relentless assault. Though the Celestial blocked the first wave, Chobe did not give up. On the second attack, his tentacles pierced the purple-haired man's arm. He was truly surprised to see an ordinary human able to surpass biological limits. To reach this level, not giving his opponent a chance to react, Chobe lunged like lightning, continuously unleashing tentacle attacks with terrifying force. A deadly thrust from Chobe's tentacle plunged straight into his navel, the Celestial's vital point, causing his body to explode into 100 pieces. A rain of blood poured down his shattered corpse, seemingly beyond regeneration. However, just as Chobe was exhausted and about to return to his original form, the Celestial reappeared behind him. This time, not just one, but dozens of his clones surrounded him, looking at him with bewildered eyes. He wanted to capture Chobe and take him to the palace as a research subject. Chobe tried to unleash a final attack, but his body had reached its limit. Through the ancient city, the Celestial delivered a brutal punch that knocked him unconscious, and his mutated form vanished. In his daze, he saw visions of his painful past with his brother Toma. When he awoke, Chobe found himself tied tightly to a bed in a lush green room filled with plants. The purple-haired man appeared again. He was surprised to see that the elixir transformation process in Chobe's body was unlike that of ordinary people. The Dao currents merged, but Chobe's Dao took control. This was a rare miracle that further excited him. Suddenly, he transformed into a female form and shed all his clothing. Chobe initially thought she was aroused, but in reality, this was the beginning of the harmonious chamber, a method of cultivating and circulating Dao between two bodies. She climbed onto him, face to face, and began to explain the circulation between the 5 attributes: wood, fire, earth, metal, water. Her hand ceaselessly fondled him, causing Chobe to flush with excitement and blush. She calmly stressed that for this technique to succeed, absolute harmony was required. However, the instincts of a bandit king wouldn't allow him to be a pawn. Chobe strained, breaking his restraints. He lunged up and grabbed her for interrogation. Faced with this ferocity, she revealed a shocking truth. All the Celestials in this strange island were created by the hands of a single person. All the strange things on this island originated from a highly skilled Taoist master. From the mainland, he had dedicated his life to researching immortality based on Taoist philosophy, where all things originate from Tao. On this isolated island, he found a way to directly control that energy. Through countless failed experiments, he fused the Tao of humans and plants to create hermaphroditic entities. They could enhance their power through the operation of yin and yang and continuously refine elixirs. For thousands of years, they had relentlessly cultivated, creating a gap in power that ordinary humans could never bridge. In their hideout, Fuchi began to analyze the enemy's techniques more deeply. In Taoism, cultivation methods such as breath regulation and meditation to achieve inner immortality are called Niden methods. Conversely, the Celestials were pursuing the path of external elixir concoction. Sagi and Yuji were astonished to hear that they were still in the process of unfinished research. What they called elixir was actually just rudimentary experimental products. To maintain immortality, they collected human life force like harvesting honey, absorbing their Tao and vitality to add to their own lifespan. However, their self-sustaining Tao source was not perfect, even with 1,000 years of cultivation. If they lost an extremely large amount of Tao in a short period, their bodies wouldn't regenerate in time, and death would be inevitable. This was the only glimmer of hope for Gabby's group to turn the tide. May confessed that even she didn't know what they would do after achieving immortality. Perhaps it was the wish of the alchemist Zhu Fu, also known as Zhu Fu, who created this island and these great celestials. Since the Qin dynasty, he served Qin Shi Huang in pursuit of eternal life. He led 3,000 boys and girls, along with hundreds of artisans, to set sail eastward and then vanish without a trace. A figure from over 1,000 years ago, yet he might still exist somewhere on this island. Continuing his insane research. In the palace, the purple-haired Jean introduced Chobe to a place that served as both a research lab and a giant testing ground. She gently placed her hand on his face, explaining that this island was merely a small garden for observing immortal life. As she was about to embrace him, Chobe instantly came to his senses and grabbed her tightly. He questioned if they were all just artificial beings. She did not deny it, explaining that everything here had a purpose. The wooden figures existed to observe life, but because they lacked the concept of death. The Shoshi were created to teach them morality and maintain order. Even the great celestials were merely creations born from the fusion of the Grand Master's Tao and various species. They were a single entity yet also possessed individual consciousness, and they themselves faced countless difficulties in maintaining their existence. Tao is the origin of all things, like dust particles filling the world, shaping all forms from matter to air. To grasp Tao is to grasp the laws of the world. However, unlike inanimate objects, controlling and sustaining life through Tao is an exponentially more difficult challenge. In the room filled with strange scents, the purple-haired celestial forcefully pinned Chobe down, yearning to merge with the special Tao within his body. But Chobe wouldn't easily give up. He sternly questioned her ambition to transform all humans on the island into the elixir of immortality. She gave a sinister smile, not hesitating to reveal a horrifying truth. Their ultimate goal was not just the island, but the entire mainland. After 1,000 years of preparation, they lacked only one perfect elixir to activate this great extermination plan. She made a tempting offer. If he cooperated, Chobe would escape being refined into medicine and become a comrade. Those of equal rank who would pursue eternal immortality with him. Standing at the threshold of life and death, Chobe stared wide-eyed, pondering. His current strength was insufficient to win. An escape was a dead end. The image of Toma, anxiously waiting, made him make a bold decision. If it must be done, I will be the one in control. He suddenly turned the tables, pinning her down to perform the harmonious chamber technique. Instead of being passive, he chose to be dominant, personally orchestrating the flow of energy. The celestial did not resist. Instead, she enchantingly intertwined with him, her hands clasped together. Amidst the carnal pleasures, Chobe remained lucid, telling himself, Toma, wait for me. Meanwhile, the evil goddess whispered with satisfaction, immersing herself in the pure and intense Tao she had never before encountered. From the condemned criminal, May's condition was at critical levels. Her small arm had begun to completely lignify, because her body was inherently imperfect whenever she used Tao. The process of turning into wood occurred, and she couldn't heal herself. Recovery through Tao circulation like Gabby was impossible, because her Danshin and ovaries had been cruelly destroyed by Jean long ago. In her pain, she remembered her past at Long Lake. She and Jean were the first disciples created by Grandmaster Zufu. But the purple-haired man changed. He became insane, killing countless people to practice external elixir methods and torturing her. Unable to stop his brutality, she chose to flee the palace. Now, with the lignification spreading, Poco made a final decision. Since the great celestials have the ability to absorb and transform Tao from other living beings, he proposed that May use his own life force to heal herself, knowing he would eventually become a lifeless tree. He saw this as a way to atone for his past mistakes. He tearfully recalled hundreds of years ago, when he had a happy family with a wife and daughter. They were lignified first, then the villagers, and finally himself. Amidst the ruins, he met May, the girl whose face was too much like his deceased daughter. He had brought her back, intentionally ignoring all truths about her identity, to pretend to be a happy family all this time. He sobbed, asking her to take his life to erase the remorse that engulfed him. May also wept in pain, running to embrace him to comfort him. To her, he was not just a guiding wooden figure, but someone who had given her the feeling of having a true father. May trembled, reaching out her hand, reluctantly activating Tao to create a brilliant light that enveloped them both. She choked back tears, drawing Hoko's last breath. Watching her adoptive father's body gradually vanish into thin air, a desperate cry echoed, "Goodbye, Dad." Hoko,